What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto got a spirit girl pregnant? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description box to original creator of this beautiful creation. When the Kyuubi was released upon Konoha, it was sealed. That much is true, it is a fact. However, like with all stories, there is more to it than that, much more. What no one in Konoha asks, neither those who knew about the previous host nor those who didn't, was why it attacked their village. Of course, that is but one of many questions that could, and should, have been asked but weren't. Still, those questions will be addressed in time, just not yet. Right now, our tale starts with the sealing of the Mega Fox of Doom into the blonde baby of inevitable heroism. Actually, that's not entirely true. After all, the entire Kyuubi was not sealed inside of the baby, only half of it. The Yondaime Hokage had the brilliant idea to do something that had never been done before, and ripped the fox's soul into pieces, half of it being sealed inside of the child, and the other half being sealed within himself, before the Shinigami dragged his soul off to be its plaything for all eternity. Now, what is important here is that the half of the Kyuubi that was sealed into newborn Naruto was the yang half of the fox. Yang being the physical part of chakra, with yin being its spiritual counterpart. The problem is, nature abhors imbalance. Predators and prey rely on each other, their numbers increasing and decreasing together, and power vacuums don't last for long. The Kyuubi's massive reserves of yang chakra, added to Naruto's own, absolutely dwarfed his yin chakra, like a planet dwarfs an ant. To balance this out, Naruto's own yin chakra was forced to grow, to develop, simply to try and match this massive amount of power. However, this development was not natural, and what is not natural does not always end well for those involved. In this case, the massive amount of spiritual power growing inside Naruto's infantile body forced a mutation. It wasn't a visible mutation, and neither was it a chakra mutation or bloodline. Instead, it forced upon something that was both gift and curse. Naruto was an outcast, an outsider, even amongst the other orphans in the orphanage. This was not because of his status as a Jinchuriki, or at least not solely because of that. After all, the Sandaime Hokage had forbidden anyone from speaking of that, not that it actually was a secret to anyone more than a decade older than Naruto. No, Naruto was strange because of his lies. He would shout and yell at things that weren't there, scream about monsters that no one else could see, and talked about people that simply weren't there. His tales ranged from the simple, such as shadows giving him an evil smile, to the complex, like the time he claimed that one of the civilians he saw was being stalked by a monster. When said civilian vanished 2 days later, Naruto was questioned. However, when the blonde boy couldn't describe the monster, beyond it being an armless shadow with a mouth full of sharp teeth, it was dismissed as a coincidence, and mostly forgotten about. Still, Naruto was known as a crazy demon child that caused bad luck because of everything that happened around him. This isolated him from the other orphans, and while the matrons of the orphanage tried to treat him just like all the others, the strain clearly showed. Naruto actually got his own room at the orphanage, but that was because none of the other orphans were brave enough to share it with him, and the room was barely bigger than a cupboard in any case. All it contained was a bed with a box slid underneath that contained all of the blonde's clothes, the only things he owned himself. This didn't upset Naruto at all, as he only really slept in that room, nothing else. The rest of the time he spent outside, and given his reputation, as far away from other people as he could get. That led to Naruto spending the majority of his time in the trees and clearings that were still inside of the village limits. Children, both civilian and shinobi, played here, but they never went very deep into the forests, not like Naruto did. The adults didn't venture there either, the civilians too busy with their own lives, and the shinobi had their training grounds to use. It was while a 5-year-old Naruto was wandering between the trees that an event that would change the course of history would occur, not that anything was particularly special about the atmosphere or anything. It was a relatively normal day, not too bright and sunny, and yet not raining either. It was not, in fact, a Tuesday either, but a Sunday, though neither day is particularly significant. There was a light breeze, and it was early summer. There was a woman sat in a tree. One of her legs was laid along the tree branch she was on, while the other dangled off the side. She had short, dark brown hair, and brown eyes. She wore a pink yukata that had a purple flower design on it, held closed by a dark purple obi. What really caught Naruto's attention, however, was a butterfly ornament that covered half of her face. Pretty, he mumbled under his breath, though it was quite audible. Ha, the woman cried. A human praising nature, at least one of them has some good taste. Naruto's eyes widened in shock at hearing her say, human. That meant, well, it meant she probably wasn't one, and even if she didn't look half as monstrous as other things Naruto had seen, they were all bad news in his books. Naruto's shock had not gone unnoticed though, and the woman sat up before hopping off the branch, taking note of how the blonde's eyes clearly followed her. Huh, this was intriguing, a human that could see her. She had thought the last of them had died out centuries ago, though she had heard rumors about a priestess girl up in Demon Country who could still see. Slowly wandering towards the boy, she could clearly see how tense he was, and a smirk crawled across her face. It was clear the boy was on the verge of running away from her, but he seemed frozen into inaction. Well, that wouldn't do. Lord Ryu may like humans, and out of respect for him she'd refrain from eating this one, but she wasn't above mischief and tricks. Leaning down in front of the boy, who was positively tiny, she allowed her smile to get even wider, wider than a human's smile would have ever stretched, and gave him a predatory look that clearly sang to his baser instincts, if the growing fear in his eyes was anything to go by. She breathed in deeply before speaking. Oh, a little morsel chooses to so easily wander my way. She licked her lips. It's been a while since I ate a human, perhaps you could sat my appetite, little one. That was it, Naruto snapped. He turned and fled right back towards Konoha and relative safety. There was a small shrine near the edge of the forest that civilians sometimes prayed to, and he had noticed that the monsters rarely went near them. That made them safe places in his book, and he couldn't get there fast enough. Naruto didn't notice a butterfly following him every step of the way. Later that night, deep in one of the forests of Konoha, a party was going on. This wasn't a party for humans though, no, this was a party for yokai. Spirits and beings of many different forms were cheering, singing, dancing, chatting, drinking, and enjoying themselves throughout the night. Several yokai were telling stories, though the material varied from yokai to yokai. Some spoke of fights between different individuals, of strength, power, and domination. Others spoke of things they had seen, the wonders of nature, and the strange things the humans did. Yet more yokai reminisced about times long since past, about memories that remained, and opportunities long since lost. The butterfly woman, who was named Benio, however, had a much different tale to tell, one more recent than any other. She spoke not of yokai, nor of the past, and not of nature. No, she spoke of a young child she had encountered that day, and the scare she had given him. She spoke of how clear-sighted the boy was, as she had followed him for the rest of the day, and while she had remained unnoticed as a butterfly, there was not one other yokai that escaped his notice. Ah, so there is still one left who can see. Tsuyukami, a white masked yokai said. I actually think I know the one you speak of. He often comes to my shrine and curls up underneath it, to escape the others I guess. Interesting, I wonder if he would hear me were I to speak to him. Hey, a human with the sight. Another yokai huffed. How strange. I thought the only ones left with even the potential for that were off in the Far East, in Demon Country. She puffed on her kiseru pipe. I don't see how someone anywhere near here could ever possess such a thing. Anything is possible, Hino. Another yokai said. I find myself intrigued by this human as well, though I am rather disappointed by how Benio chose to approach him. Scaring him like that was rather childish and petty of her. Hey, Benio exclaimed. I didn't eat him, is it good enough for you, you soft-hearted idiot? Hino waved her pipe in Benio's face, causing her to cough and splutter, though she shut up. You should know by now, Benio, what to expect from our resident optimist. Without sway around to ground him, I'm sure that he'd be amongst the clouds by now, his head's filled with that much hot air. Hino chuckled. Sway is the adventurous one of us too. Jen pouted. I'm happy in my statue, but if we had the opportunity, and Sway wanted to, I'd explore the whole world with her. We know, you hopeless romantic. Benio snarked at him. Jen proceeded to huddle under a tree, a storm cloud over his head, for the next 10 minutes, until Sway came along and cheered him up. Tsuyukami just chuckled at the display, before reaching for some more sake. Ah, Jen, always the emotional one. Always the crybaby, you mean? Benio snorted. When he's not fawning over Sway, he's finding something else to be depressed about. I suppose. Tsuyukami shrugged. Never mind him now though, Sway will look after him. I'm still rather interested in our local sighted human. Was there anything else odd about him that you noticed before you scared him off? Nothing much. Benio shrugged. He was a tiny little thing, a baby even by human standards. He was blonde with blue eyes, wore a black shirt with a symbol on it, and a pair of white shorts. He had some marks on his face, and he absolutely reeked of raw power. Power? Hino asked, interested. What sort of power? Nothing old. Benio replied. It was all of his own, and it was immense. It's wild though, untrained, but what do you expect from humans, especially when there's nobody to train him in it? The humans have their chakra though, don't they? Tsuyukami mused. At least, I remember, who was it, Hagoromo? Yes, I believe he had some sort of power he called chakra, didn't he? The boy had chakra, yes. Benio admitted, but it was the spiritual power I sensed, something that exceeded even Lords Ryu, Masuzu, and Raka combined. Really now? Hino mused. Now you're really making me curious. Perhaps I'll take a look in on this child myself. Do whatever you want, I'm going for more sake. Benio replied, picking up her now empty sake saucer. Hino glanced towards Tsuyukami. Tomorrow, would you mind showing me where, from your shrine, the kid usually comes from? Will do. The masked Yukai agreed. I think he lives near my shrine, he hides there often enough. Hino thanked him before heading out to enjoy the party some more, but a small part of her mind was curiously turning over the thought of this child in her mind. When Naruto returned to the orphanage, after hiding out at a shrine for a few hours, he immediately went to his room. That monster today had been far scarier than all of the others, if only because she'd looked completely human, not even having an extendable neck or anything. If he couldn't tell the difference between people and monsters, then he didn't know what he'd do. He slept fitfully that night, and awoke the next morning with shadows under his eyes. As he left the orphanage after breakfast and headed to the nearest shrine, he passed the library. Naruto lamented the fact that he currently couldn't read anything more complex than his own name, because he was sure he'd find something in there about what these things he was seeing could be. Even if they were myths and legends, it would be something. Stopping at a shrine, Naruto was surprised to find two people he didn't recognize there. One of them was a man who wore a white mask with a mustache painted on, a red cap, and traditional clothing. The other was a beautiful woman with blue hair who wore a traditional kimono in vivid colors that had a pattern of flower petals on it, and she held a pipe in one hand that she was smoking. Is this the one? The woman asked, to which the man nodded. I think so, and he can clearly see us both. The man replied. Once again, this caused Naruto to freeze. Why would they talk like they usually couldn't be seen? The only logical answer would be because it's true, and there was only one group of beings that Naruto could think of that he could see and others couldn't. These two were obviously monsters as well. Before he could flee though, Naruto felt a hand clamp down on his shoulder, keeping him in place. Turning slowly, he found the woman with the pipe was holding him in place, seemingly far more relaxed than Naruto was right now, and he felt himself beginning to hyperventilate. Calm down, kid, the masked man said. Benio might have scared you the other night, but Hino and I are just a bit curious about you. He comforted the obviously frightened Naruto. There's not many people that can see us at all, much less as clearly as you seem able to, almost like you're one of us. Oh, one of you? Naruto masked hesitantly. We're yokai, kid, the woman, Hino, told him. You know, spirits, ghosts, phantoms, etc. Most people can't see us, in fact we'd thought there was no one left who had that ability, but then you turn up. We got curious about you, so, do you feel like telling us about yourself? You want to know about me? Naruto asked cautiously. Yeah, we do, Tsuyukami said. I've seen you hiding under my shrine before, but I didn't realize you could see us. Okay then, Naruto mumbled. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, and I'm 5 years old. My birthday is October 10th, and I can see Monstyukai. He stumbled over the word. I live in the orphanage, and I like to go on walks and play in the trees. The other kids think I'm freaky and weird, so they don't play with me, and the adults seem scared of me for some reason. My name is Tsuyukami. The masked Yukai introduced himself. I don't know how old I am though, not many Yukai do as we don't keep track of time. I would say that I'm probably centuries old at least, maybe even more than 1,000. I live around here, where my shrine is, and I like watching the weather change. I often go out to gatherings of other yokai to have some fun too. Tsuyukami and Naruto both looked at Hino, who had a small smile on her face. She huffed slightly before introducing herself the same way. I am Hino, she said. I'm not sure how old I am either, and I live deeper into the forest. Like Tsuyukami, I go to the gatherings to drink and be merry. I do have quite the collection of scrolls that I read through occasionally, and I enjoy smoking too. Ah, it's nice to meet you too. Naruto, knowing his manners, tried to be as polite as possible to the two Mons Yukai. They wouldn't think him crazy for being able to see them, and it wasn't like they were trying to scare him or attack him either. In fact, they were being downright friendly. Tsuyukami seemed generally jovial and Hino seemed more curious than anything. So, Naruto, what is it you normally do during the day? Tsuyukami asked. Well, I go to school during the week. When I turn 8, I might change to the ninja academy though. Naruto said. After school, I stay outside until it's time to go back to the orphanage and sleep. I always end up running away from yokai though, so I hide at shrines. Yokai don't seem to like them too much. That's because people pray at shrines. Tsuyukami explained. Unless you're a yokai that's in tune with such things, the minor holy power a used shrine gives off is uncomfortable, and in some cases painful for us. Stronger yokai like Hino here can ignore that however. Naruto, you said you go to school? Hino asked. What time does it start? Naruto paused, before his eyes widened in surprise. Realizing he'd stayed at the shrine too long, he turned and began running towards his school. Before he disappeared though, he shouted a farewell over his shoulder. As the blonde boy disappeared around a corner, Hino's lips quirked up into an amused smile. What an interesting little child. She mused. Tsuyukami nodded in agreement. I think the near future will become quite interesting with him nearby. Of course, Hino agreed. With a sighted child around, it will draw more yokai to the area, curious ones. And those that will eat him because of the power he contains. Tsuyukami added. That too. Hino conceded. Though if Lord Ryu found out about him, he'd have some protection at least. Should we tell him? Tsukami wondered aloud. No, Hino replied. I think we should introduce them. After school that day, Naruto quickly returned to the shrine. Tsuyukami had said he often saw Naruto there, so that means he must have been there pretty often as well. Besides, that day at school had only driven home just how alone he was, and just how desperate he was for a friend. Parents warned their children away from him, but even without that he was still known as the creepy, crazy kid that saw things that didn't exist. Both of those things together only served to rob Naruto of any friends he might have had, and on top of that, children were cruel. It's a sad truth of reality that children don't usually understand what their actions and words mean to others, that they can hurt others when they're not being hurt themselves. Feeding this by specifically telling a child to avoid another, especially when you don't say why, can result in that child becoming very isolated from their peers. Naruto accepted that he wasn't liked very much, and he had no friends, but that didn't mean he liked it. No, he absolutely hated it. He hated it when the other children made a game of run away from the monster, with Naruto being the monster. It might have been a game to them, but it was a sad reality to him. Now though, things might change, at least a little. These yokai were grown-ups. They were even more grown-ups than the old people, they were that old. They didn't look at him with wariness or revulsion either, and they didn't move away from him too. When he got to the shrine, his smile faded a little. Neither Hino or Tsuyukami were. Had he really met them that morning, or had it been his imagination? Maybe it had been a joke to them, getting his hopes up and then laughing behind his back when he thought he might finally have a friend. Yo, Naruto, nice to see you here again. Naruto's neck almost snapped with how quickly he looked up. Sitting in the tree and lazing around was Tsuyukami. His masked face pointed his way as he waved at the young boy. Naruto's expression instantly shifted from depressed into a beaming smile. He hadn't imagined them. They weren't playing a trick on him. Hey, Tsuyukami, how are you? Naruto called out, scrambling to climb up the tree with the yokai. Careful, Naruto, you don't want to fall from up here. Tsuyukami chided the child. As for me, I'm wonderful. The weather is warm, the sun is bright, and Hana has left me some peaches as well. Here, have one for yourself. Tsuyukami tossed a peach to Naruto, who caught it easily. He looked at the peach, sniffed it, and then bit into it. "It's good," Naruto exclaimed. They always are." Tsuyukami agreed. "Hana has been bringing me peaches for years now. Seeing her grow older is how I've been keeping track of time for decades now. Such a sweet girl she is, and she tells me about everything that goes on in the village as well." "She sounds nice," Naruto said. "Maybe you'll meet her one day, though she usually turns up here on the weekend." Tsuyukami: "I'm sure she'd be happy to meet you too." "Maybe," Naruto murmured. "Most people don't really like me very much." Tsuyukami sighed. "I am not too surprised by that. Those that can see us often lead unhappy lives, torn between two worlds. Remember, young Naruto, what you have is both a blessing and a curse. However, you can choose how you handle it. I've known those who've ignored us and driven themselves to insanity. I've known others who've embraced us and ended up eaten. The most successful are the ones who try and keep both worlds separate, but they face hardships of their own." "So life is hard?" Naruto asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. "For humans? Always," Tsuyukami answered. "There are things that make it worth the effort though: love, friends, joy, and so much more. We yokai envy humans for the enthusiasm and determination they show for the slightest things, while they envy us for our long lifespans that we do nothing with." "What do you mean, you don't do anything?" Naruto wondered. "Well, that's simple," Tsuyukami replied. "In their lifetime, a human will grow up, learning all kinds of skills, and then they will work hard to earn their own money. A blacksmith will forge many things, a carpenter will craft many more, and a teacher will instruct the next generation. They are always doing something, always driving themselves further. We yokai, however, laze about all day long. We don't need money, nor do we really need anything else, not even sleep. All yokai do are drink and make merry. Isn't having fun a good thing though?" Naruto persisted. "In moderation, yes," Tsuyukami told him. "However, when all you know is how to have fun, it starts to lose all meaning. It becomes something you do because that is all you know, and all you care about, and it seems my words have gone right over your head, dearie me. Then again, maybe we could have this conversation when you're older, and see if it doesn't make some more sense?" Okay?" Naruto hesitantly agreed, before looking around. Tsuyukami, where is Hino, is she not here too?" "Not right now, she's not," Tsuyukami responded. "This is where I stay, and while she's always welcome to visit me, she lives elsewhere. Besides, she's off doing something right now. Maybe she'll tell you about it when next she sees you, Now, is there anything else you'd like to ask me?" "Well, there's a few things actually," Naruto said, before he started to bombard the yokai with questions about anything and everything he could think of. Tsuyukami cheerfully answered everything he could, quite happy to speak with this young man. Hino was, in fact, actually speaking with Ryu, the lord of the forest amongst yokai. She was telling him about Naruto, and to say the least, Ryu was curious. He'd always had a soft spot for humans, and to hear of a child with the sight within his domain was both good and bad at the same time. It was good because it was something that would draw yokai to the area, giving him command of numerous lesser yokai, not that he much cared for ruling over others. In fact, he let the yokai in his area do as they pleased, though he did ask that they refrain from needlessly killing humans. Naruto being around was also bad, because when news spread, it would draw less pleasant yokai to the area as well, those that would want his power for themselves, and those that would want to consume him to become more powerful. Those yokai would challenge Ryu, and he did not want his underlings to suffer because of that. He resolved to meet with this human himself, and see just what sort of child this, Naruto, was. "And you say Benio was the first of mine he met?" Ryu asked Hino, who nodded. "Yes, she actually scared him all the way back to his orphanage," she confirmed. "However, he's also met myself and Tsuyukami, and he seems like quite the resilient brat. Given that the other children, and from what little I saw the adults too, avoid him like the plague, I'd have expected him to be far more depressing than he was. Children are often the toughest and most hardy of types," Ryu mused. "They're at the age where they can become anything they wish to be, and will tend to bounce back up from anything that knocks them down. They're enthusiastic and energetic to an extreme degree. That doesn't explain the sheer level of power he possesses," Hino murmured. "It can't have been inherited, we'd have known if there was someone with that much spiritual power around. Besides that, he can see, and I thought that, If any of them had still existed, they would be off in the Far East, not here. No, it doesn't explain that. Ryu agreed. Then again, how did humans originally come to possess the sight? We don't know the answer to that question either. Perhaps it ebbs and flows, and it is only now beginning to occur again. Maybe young Naruto was simply born in unique circumstances. It could be that the child is the result of some experiment or other, and being able to see us is merely a side effect of whatever was done to him. Experiments? Do you really believe the humans to be doing something like that? Hino wondered. That was far from what she'd expect the human-loving optimist to suggest. A dark look crossed Ryu's face. I often wander the woods, and I have come upon several hidden laboratories in recent years. Inside, I have found many human corpses, in various stages of decay, and with various disfigurements as well. Just what the goal was, I could not say, and as I do not read the human language, I could not gain anything from the scattered notes in there either. Hino frowned. If there are experiments which would allow them to see us, that's rather concerning. Would you show me where these laboratories are? I can read the human language, so I might be able to find something useful, or at least informative, in there. Of course, Ryu agreed. Seeing this is the first step to sealing us away like they did the Biju, and as much as I like humans, I have no desire to be forced to be a weapon for them, and even I know there are humans that would do just that to us. Both Yukai were silent for a moment, thinking about what depravities humans committed against each other. Ryu sighed. Let's dispense with such a heavy topic. Whether or not this Naruto gained his sight naturally or not, he has it now, and it would be far better to deal with him while young, and while he knows nothing of Fuinjutsu. If he grew up terrified of Yukai and learned how to seal them, things would quickly turn unpleasant for us. Deal with him? Hino asked. In what way? It almost sounds as if you wish to kill him. I don't, Ryu corrected her. However, while he is a child, he is easily influenced, and from what you've said, he doesn't have a very positive opinion of Yukai, his interactions with you and Tsuyukami aside. If we can get him to look favorably on us now, he is unlikely to go on some sort of crusade against us when he's older, and has both the knowledge and power to destroy us. Ryu then smiled. Besides, I'm always happy to make a new friend. Hino scoffed. You always are, you soft-hearted fool, she said, though there was no heat in her voice. How shall I be introduced to young Naruto then? Ryu asked. He goes past Tsuyukami's shrine every day on the way to and from school. Hino told him. It might be best to introduce you tomorrow afternoon, and tell him that there's someone who'd like to meet him when he goes past on the morning. Then I will follow your advice. Ryu agreed. Now, do you wish to see those distasteful laboratories today? Hino sighed. I might as well, it'll get it out of the way sooner this way. Then follow me then, the closest one I've found is rather deep in the forest and quite far from the trodden paths. Ryu said as he began to lead Hino off between the trees. So, Naruto, you've asked me plenty, I think it's my turn. Tsuyukami said when Naruto had finally ran out of questions for him. How about you tell me what you do at school all day long? Yukai don't have them, and I've never actually gone near one before. Well, at school we learn basic stuff. Naruto replied. We learn to read and write, we learn maths, and we learn about history as well. He frowned. It's strange though, I thought history was about really old things, but we don't learn anything more than the last 100 years or so. Why is that? Tsuyukami laughed. At a guess? I'd say it's because humans don't live very long. It's very rare for one of you to reach 100, so there's no one left who can tell you about before. Well, there's also the fact that humans fight and kill each other a lot. I imagine that your history is pretty bloody. Naruto nodded. Yeah, we haven't learned about it yet, but the teacher did say we would be doing the 3 great shinobi wars, and that before the founding of the villages, people lived in clans that always fought with each other as well. He didn't say why though, do people just like to fight a lot? I don't know, Tsuyukami replied. Yukai fight quite a bit, but that's one-on-one to prove who's the stronger. We don't really fight wars, or even battles, much, we're too laid back for that. Living as long as we do, we tend to be relatively mellow, I believe the word is. Though do be careful, Naruto, there are Yukai who are actively malicious as well, and if they find out about you, and they will one day, they will come after you. Your sight is a sign of great spiritual power, and there are those who would want that power for themselves. Okay, Naruto said, slightly disheartened by Tsuyukami's warning, though he did perk up when the Yukai ruffled his hair. Cheer up, Naruto, your sight is also a good thing. He said, without it, would we be talking like this? No, you'd walk past this shrine and never see me, and I would never speak to you. Always remember, for every bad thing that happens, something good can come from it, even if it is just learning what not to do in a certain situation. Every cloud has a silver lining, I believe the humans say. Thanks, Tsuyukami. Naruto smiled at the yokai, who chuckled good-naturedly at the blonde boy. The two of them remained sitting in that tree for several hours, a novel experience for the usually physically active Naruto, but one he found himself enjoying quite a bit. Well, what he was enjoying was more likely the pleasant company of Tsuyukami, and the comfortable silence between the two of them. Tsuyukami, for his part, kept one eye on Naruto, observing him, but his attention was also elsewhere. Looking towards the village proper, he saw the civilian population of Konoha milling around, some ninja mixed in as well. He also saw other ninja running across the rooftops, and in some cases up walls and into windows. Tsuyukami had never paid much attention to humans outside of the ones who visited his shrine, but he did now. He wondered just how easy or difficult the things he saw ninja do were, and if Naruto would learn something like that in the future. Of course, Naruto might not choose to become a ninja and remain a civilian, but Tsuyukami doubted he would do that. He didn't think Naruto felt very comfortable amongst the civilians, what with being the creepy, crazy kid, and there were ninja who were far more odd than the blonde was. Tsuyukami recalled Hino complaining about some green-clad human with shiny hair that woke up very early every morning, and had often awoken her too when she'd had a rather bad hangover from drinking too much the night before. Jen and Sui had some strange stories as well, and they'd seen a lot from their statues that stood at the entrance to one of the training grounds. Still, that was in the future, and while years meant very little to yokai, it was a very long time for a human, especially a young one, and Naruto could very well change his mind about whether or not to become a ninja 8,000 times over before the time came to choose whether he wanted to take that path or not. It's getting late, Naruto eventually said. I've got to get back to the orphanage for supper and bedtime. He jumped out of the tree before turning back to Tsuyukami. Will you be here tomorrow as well? He asked. I should be, Tsuyukami replied. I'm here most days, though I do wander off occasionally too. Still, I've got nowhere else to be, so yes, you'll see me here tomorrow. Bye then, Naruto said, waving as he walked away from the shrine. Farewell, young Naruto. Tsuyukami raised a hand and waved as well. See you another time. When Naruto got back to the orphanage, he was just in time to put his school bag under his bed, wash himself, and then get seated for supper. After that, he went to his room and pulled his bag out again. He had homework to do, though it was nothing complicated, just a handwriting exercise and some basic addition and subtraction. What Naruto didn't notice was a white butterfly watching him from above the doorframe. Said butterfly silently flapped down to the ground, where it shifted into the form of a smirking Benio. Making sure to keep quiet, she sneaked up behind Naruto, who was focusing on his homework, and leaned over him before whispering into his ear. Hello again, little morsel. Naruto almost leapt out of his skin as he fell off his bed and crashed to the floor, his eyes wide and his heart beating 1,000 beats a minute. His eyes then locked onto the mischievous expression of the woman who wore a butterfly ornament covering half of her face. Benio frowned as she saw Naruto calm down upon catching sight of her. Now why would he do that? She'd expected him to flee at the sight of her or maybe throw something, giving his reaction the other day, but no, seeing her had paradoxically calmed him down for some reason. What, not even going to try and run away? She asked. Not going to make this even a little fun for me? Tsuyukami said you had too much respect to Lord Ryu to eat a human in his territory. Naruto told her. Benio blinked in surprise. That washed-up weakling's been saying what about me now? She questioned. He said that you were quite mischievous and cynical, but you really look up to Lord Ryu, and wouldn't do something to displease him. Naruto replied. What does cynical mean? It means I know just how selfish people really are. She responded. Wait, that's not important. When did you talk to Tsuyukami? Benio demanded to know. I met him in Hino this morning, and I spent most of the afternoon with him. Naruto replied. And you didn't run away screaming like a little girl? Benio raised her one visible eyebrow. Those two are on a whole different level to the weak trash that hides amongst humans, and Hino herself is pretty damn powerful all by herself. They didn't seem that bad to me, Naruto said. They were quite nice. And you said nature was pretty before too. Benio scoffed. That prettiness hides a lot of viciousness, brat. Do you want me to tell you exactly how a spider traps its prey in its web? How they wrap them up, and then keep them around until they're hungry? Do you want me to explain how spiders eat? How they dissolve their prey in their digestive juices and then suck them out? I was calling you pretty. Naruto mumbled, his head hung low, and thus missed Benio's reaction to his words. She actually jerked backwards in surprise, before she covered her mouth with one hand and held her side while she silently laughed at his words. A human calling her pretty? Yeah, that was a new one on her. Physical appearance didn't mean much to a yokai, and so she'd never even thought about whether she was attractive or not. Hell, she wasn't exactly right either. Yokai were mostly genderless anyway, regardless of how they appeared. She regained control of herself after a few moments of silent laughter. But mirth still remained in her glimmer of her visible eye, and in the tilt of her lips. She regarded Naruto for a moment, before reaching out and messing up his hair. She had to hold back a laugh as he almost jerked out of her grasp. Not used to physical contact then. Benio thought to herself. Not surprising really, an orphan with the sight, called crazy, and with even other kids keeping their distance isn't exactly going to grow up normal. Stop doing that. Naruto frowned, not liking how Benio was messing with his hair. Benio did it once more, before placing the palm of her hand on his forehead and pushing him backwards. She smirked at him as he righted himself and picked his homework up. She eyed him carefully and made note of what difference even one day could make to a human. He seemed far less scared, but then again, she had been actively trying to get a reaction out of him last time. He seemed calmer as well, and happier too. Given just how cheerful Tsuyukami was most of them time, maybe the kid had found a friend in the masked yokai, or at least someone he could talk to. So, brat, what are you doing? Benio asked. My homework, and my name's Naruto, not brat. He muttered. You're human and you'll die in a few decades. Until you do something to impress me, you're going to be brat for the time being. Benio retorted. What would impress you? Naruto asked. Does the little brat like me? Benio faked a blush. I'm sorry, brat, but you're too young for me, and I'm pretty sure that you're too young to be thinking of things like that. What are you going on about? Naruto grumbled, only understanding that Benio was mocking him somehow. You'll understand in a few years. Benio waved him off. Until then, however, I can say so many things that will go right over your head. Do you have to? Naruto huffed. Of course. Benio said, like it was the most logical thing ever. Now that threatening to eat you is no longer an option, I'm forced to use other methods to frustrate and annoy you. Why do you have to annoy me at all? Naruto complained. Because I find it quite entertaining, why else? Benio shrugged. It's not like I've got anything else to do with my time, is it now? Naruto slumped. Does that mean you're going to be following me everywhere? Well, I wasn't going to. I was going to just find and annoy you several times a day. Benio admitted. Now though, I think I will. It'll give me a front row seat to any blackmail material I might get my hands on, nay? I just doomed myself, didn't I? Naruto whined. Yes, brat, you did. Benio smirked. The next morning, when Naruto sat down at the table for breakfast, everyone else in the orphanage had to take a second look, to make sure they were really seeing what they thought they were. Sitting on top of Naruto's blonde hair was a large, white butterfly, about twice the size of an adult's palm. Naruto tried waving the butterfly off, looking rather grumpy as he did so, but as soon as he stopped flailing around, it settled on his hair once again. That wasn't normal butterfly behavior, and no one recognized it as a local breed of butterfly either. It was too large to be anything outside of the Forest of Death, and it didn't look lethal enough to survive there either. Naruto, where did that butterfly come from? One of the matrons asked the blonde child. It flew into my room last night and won't leave me alone. Naruto replied. Okay then, the matron hesitantly said, mentally chalking this up to one more odd thing about the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Naruto didn't say anything else as he ate breakfast, got his school stuff together and collected a packed lunch, but he felt all of the eyes focused on him, and he could hear the whispers as well. He didn't let it get to him though, at least now he knew what it was he was seeing, yokai, and not all of them were mean to him, even if Benio was proving her mischief by frustrating him right then. After he'd gotten his morning ablutions out of the way, Naruto picked up his bag, slipped on a pair of black sandals, and headed straight out the door. While there were kids in Naruto's year, and even his class, in the orphanage, he always headed off earlier than anyone else did. After all, none of them wanted to be seen anywhere near him if they could help it. As usual, Naruto's path took him past Tsuyukami's shrine, and he hurried along quicker than normal, hoping to see him, and possibly anyone else that might be there as well. Tsuyukami was the only yokai Naruto knew the location of, though Benio could likely point him in the right direction. Then again, she would probably not do so or point him towards some other trickster yokai like herself. As it turned out, Tsuyukami was there, like he usually was, and once again so was Hino. The blue-haired yokai did raise an eyebrow when she saw Benio nestled on Naruto's hair like she was, and her lips twitched upwards in a small smirk. Naruto felt Benio freeze still for a moment, and wondered why she had done that, not realizing the glint in Hino's eyes meant she was already thinking up ways to use what Benio was doing as her own blackmail material. "Good morning, Tsuyukami, Hino." Naruto cheerfully greeted the two, and the two yokai couldn't help but feel the joy the blonde boy practically radiated at them. Both of them bid him a good morning as well, before Hino chose to address the unexpected addition to the morning. "Good morning, Benio, as well." She smirked. My, it seems your attitude has changed rather quickly. From scaring him witless to being so comfortable with him, I didn't realize your tastes ran so young. Ah, what would the others say when I tell them of this, I wonder? Benio turned back into her regular form, her cheeks tinted pink as she huffed at Hino. "It's nothing like that, you're imagining things. Since Tsuyukami told him that I wouldn't actually eat him, I had to find some other way to torment him, and annoying the brat is a good way to spend my time." "Sure, keep saying that, maybe someone will be gullible enough to believe it." Hino retorted. "Why, you. Now, let's just all calm down." Tsuyukami interrupted Benio before she could get going. "Naruto will have to go to school soon, and we have a bit of news for him." "You do?" Naruto asked. "Another yokai wants to meet the brat?" Benio asked Tsuyukami, though she still glared at Hino. "Yes, and one you are rather familiar with at that, Benio." Hino told her. "Lord Ryu is interested in meeting Naruto himself, and will be waiting here with us after school is over with today." "Lord Ryu?" Naruto murmured, before turning to Benio. "Isn't he the one you respect a lot?" Benio looked askance at Naruto. "Lord Ryu is the local forest lord. He's one of the strongest yokai around, and his territory covers a large chunk of the woods around this village. He's a very important person with many underlings, and he is beloved by us all." Tsuyukami nodded. "His territory and Lord Raka's completely encircles your village," he said. "However, Raka doesn't have as many underlings as Lord Ryu, and he is far less active as well. Both of them are rather friendly though, so you don't need to worry about either of them, and Lord Ryu in particular is known for being quite fond of humans." "So he's a good guy then?" Naruto asked. Hino smiled. "Yes, Naruto, Lord Ryu is a good guy, as you say, and you'll be meeting him this afternoon." "Awesome," Naruto cheered. "Wait, how will I know it's him?" "He'll be with us, for one," Hino told him. Benio could easily identify him too, and he is quite distinctive. He looks like a human with large white wings and has blue eyes and hair. He tends to wear white as well. I don't think you could mistake him for anyone else, so don't worry yourself over it. Now, shouldn't you be getting off to school?" Tsuyukami asked. "You don't want to be late, do you? Bye then, see you later," Naruto called out, waving at the two of them as Benio transformed back into a butterfly and made herself comfortable on his hair. That day at school, Naruto could hardly manage to keep himself still. He usually had trouble doing so, being as hyperactive as he was, but today he was even worse, because he would be meeting with a yokai lord, an actual lord with actual underlings, and someone who was quite powerful if the way Benio reacted to his name was any indication. Still, he kept himself under control as much as he could. He didn't want one of the teachers holding him back after school because of him not being able to keep still. They already criticized him every opportunity they could get. They never sabotaged him or anything, and if another kid did something wrong, they were punished for it, but they dug through all of Naruto's work, looking for the tiniest mistake to call him out on. Truth be told, he'd actually learned more by them doing that than if they'd simply ignored him like most people do. That was something to rub in their faces when he was older and successful. For now though, he was simply counting down the time until he met with Ryu. Ryu arrived at Tsuyukami's shrine 3 hours after midday, shortly before Naruto was to pass by. Tsuyukami casually tossed him and Hino a peach each. The masked Yukai always seemed to have a never-ending supply of them courtesy of that Hana woman he mentioned from time to time. So one more time, I will recognize Naruto by. Ryu asked, glancing at Hino. He's a blue-eyed blonde with whisker-like birthmarks on his cheeks. She told him. Oh, and Benio might be resting on his head as well, she was this morning. Benio, Ryu chuckled. I wouldn't have thought her the type, she's never been particularly fussed about humans before. She claims that she's hanging around so she can annoy him. Tsuyukami added his input. I think it's a bit of that, a bit of boredom, and quite a bit of it being a novelty having a sighted human so close by. I can see the appeal. Ryu nodded. Now, do you either of you have any advice on how to approach this matter? Hino hummed thoughtfully for a moment. Naruto's a cheerful kid, not a bad bone in his body, so intimidation and aggression is definitely not the right way to go about it. However, given what humans are like, violence is almost inevitable, so offering to help look after him might be a good idea, or at least helping him to take care of himself. It'll build up a good rapport at least. Is there anything we even could teach him if we went with that option? Ryu asked. We're not ninja, we don't possess fancy techniques, and our physical fights are more to do with strength and speed than technique. Yukai are rather good with illusions and curses though. Hino commented. All it would require for him to learn how to do it would be to separate the spiritual part of his chakra from the rest of it. Besides, I have a few scrolls with some old Yukai techniques and he might possibly find useful against other humans. It is important to note here that Yukai did not use elemental techniques. Primarily, this was because to use them would require them to convert their spiritual power into an element, and that was rather pointless and wasteful when it was raw spiritual power that was most effective against them. Therefore, because it's fairly useless, none of them bothered with it, even if they were capable of using such techniques. That sounds suspiciously like the sort of things a fighter would be interested in. Do you really think he will choose to be a ninja? Ryu wondered. From what you've said, he doesn't have the right temperament to be one. He's an orphan. Tsuyukami decided to be the one to answer this time. There aren't many options open to orphans, and on top of that, most people seem on edge or wary of him, if not hateful, so that closes more doors. Where would he gain an apprenticeship? Where would employ him? Given that about 3/5 of the village is dedicated to the military as well, how many options does he really have? Beyond that, it seems almost a requirement for ninjas to have some strange quirk or habit. Hino commented. His sight would fit in well with the exercise nut who runs around the village every morning, and I've heard some rather strange stories about some even more unique individuals who wear that metal plate on their heads. Should we nudge him in that direction then? Ryu mused. The earlier he makes a decision, the sooner he can start preparing for it. I am sure being a mercenary for hire is quite a demanding job, and not something to be taken lightly. The decision is ultimately his to make. Tsuyukami reminded them. However, I do believe that being a ninja would make Naruto the happiest, and it would probably be the best for him too. He's already an outcast from the civilians, so why not try a different group? Ryu sighed. Very well. Assuming that Naruto really is as good-hearted as he sounds, we shall endeavor to direct his attention towards becoming a ninja, but in doing so we will also become responsible for ensuring he has the best possible chance at surviving just such a profession, both physically and mentally. Understood. Tsuyukami agreed, though there's not much I could teach him myself. A child needs more than teachers. Hino countered. Become his confidant, a friend if you will. You like making new friends just as much as Lord Ryu does, and beyond that, perhaps you could introduce him to the Kappa or Kogitsune. Meeting childish Yukai such as them would probably be good for him. Enough, you two, I believe young Naruto is here. Ryu interrupted them before Tsuyukami could say anything back to Hino, and all three Yukai looked towards where a blonde boy with a butterfly on his head was indeed approaching them. Hello, Naruto. Tsuyukami called out cheerfully, waving at the blonde. Hey, Tsuyukami. Naruto waved back. Hello, Hino. Hello, little Naruto. Hino smiled at him. We have someone to introduce to you here, like we told you about this morning. Hello. Naruto greeted the winged Yukai. You're Lord Ryu, right? I'm Naruto Uzumaki, it's nice to meet you. It's a pleasure to meet you as well. Ryu replied. Hino and Tsuyukami have spoken of little else since yesterday, and I found myself curious about you. You want to know about me? Naruto asked. Yes, I do. Shall we walk? With Naruto's agreement, he and the blonde child walked beside each other into the trees, only Benio, still resting on Naruto's head, accompanying them. After a few moments of silence, Ryu spoke again. I am curious about you, Naruto, very much so. There was once a time where those with the sight were rare, but not impossible to find. Now, you are the only confirmed person who can see us, and the only other one we know of with the potential is a priestess in Demon Country. I'm sure you can see why I might want to know more about you. I'm weird, different. Naruto's head drooped at that. I will not deny that you are different, everyone is, especially you Kai. Ryu comforted the boy. However, I feel a need to warn you about the future ahead of you. As I'm sure you've already heard, having the sight is both a blessing and a curse. You have the opportunity to clearly see what no other human can, to become part of something wonderful. However, as much as I may wish it were, the world of Yukai is not some paradise for all. There will be those who would seek to use you as a tool, or make you their thrall. There will also be those who wish to devour you, your sight being proof of you having high spiritual power. Ryu sighed. Naruto frowned at that, not fully understanding every word Ryu said, but getting the gist of what he meant. There's going to be monsters coming for me, ones who want to eat me, and thrall me. He stumbled over the unfamiliar word, not entirely sure what it meant. A thrall is someone who is akin to a slave. Ryu explained. And yes, there will be those who will want to eat you. It will be impossible to keep your abilities a secret forever, and sooner or later, news will spread beyond my own forest, drawing foreign Yukai here. I'm sorry. Naruto apologized. I didn't mean to make any trouble for you. Think nothing of it, Naruto. Ryu waved off the apology. While, yes, news of you will cause some stirring amongst Yukai, having you frequent my domain also grants me a certain level of status amongst my peers. Seeing Naruto's confusion, he chuckled. Don't worry about it, the ways of politics, both human and Yukai, are complex, and not for children to worry about. So what should I do now? Naruto asked. That is something only you can decide, Naruto. Ryu responded. However, I can give you some advice of my own. Your future will involve conflict, either with Yukai or with others, and so I will suggest you seek to learn how to protect yourself. To that end, I want to know whether you wish to be a ninja or not. The old man always has really awesome stories about ninjas. Naruto exclaimed. They can do all sorts of cool things, and they can go all sorts of places. Being a ninja sounds really cool. They get to save princesses, and fight dragons, and so much more. Which old man told you that? Ryu asked. The one in the funny hat, the Hokage. Naruto replied. He comes around every now and then and talks to me and some of the others. Ryu sighed. I guess becoming a ninja is inevitable then. However, he wondered why exactly the village leader bothered with this one child in particular. There are a few things that you need to know though, a few truths you need to be aware of before you think about being a ninja. What do you mean? Naruto asked. While it is true that a ninja may save a princess, the stories you were told are likely very rare. There are simply too many ninjas and too few princesses who need saving for it to happen all the time. Ryu told him. Ninjas are far more likely to have to save diplomats and the like, or maybe some more minor nobility. So they save less important people? Naruto wondered. Yes, but even then that sort of mission probably isn't too common. Ryu cautioned him. Ninjas are mercenaries, they fight for money, so depending on the needs of people, you might end up doing very different missions to the ones you have been told about. What sort of missions would we be doing? Naruto questioned Ryu. Well, I think escort missions are rather common. Ryu racked his mind to think of examples. Likely for merchants who are wary of bandits on the roads. You might get delivery missions as well, and possibly search and destroy missions if bandits or raiders attack somewhere. You might get investigation missions where something has happened, or tracking missions if someone or something is lost. That sounds really complicated, Naruto said. It is, as all things are. Ryu told him. Aside from that, there are various parts of the village which involve ninjas as well. I believe the hospital staff also have some level of training, and the administration for the village leader. The teachers will be able to look after themselves, and so many more will. On top of that, I believe the village also has a number of ninja clans, all of which at least have some level of training. It's a dangerous world we live in, it's better to be prepared for it than not. But what can I do? Naruto burbled quietly. Ryu looked down at Naruto and saw tears had started to gather at the corners of his eyes. He had forgotten that he was speaking to a child, one only half a decade old at that, and not someone older who could understand the world better. Ignoring how Benio was still present, Ryu knelt down and wrapped his arms around Naruto in a hug. Feeling the boy freeze in place, Ryu continued on as comfortingly as he could. Naruto, I don't mean to scare you, far from it in fact. I just want you to know what sort of problems you may face in the future. The more you know now, the better you can prepare for it, no? But how would I prepare? Naruto asked, his voice muffled by Ryu's arms and wings. You learn, Ryu told him. Apply yourself in your lessons during the day, take all you can from them, and on the afternoons, well, Yukai may not be ninja, but that doesn't stop you learning a few things from us. Illusions is something we are naturally gifted at, and while there are few who do so, we can manipulate energy if we so choose. Actually, let me give you your first lesson. Come, sit with me. Ryu took a seat at the base of a tree, Naruto sitting beside him. Now, everything that happens can be broken down into three things. There's an input, a process, and an output. In other words, something is put in, something happens to it, and something comes out of it. Now, the most common thing used as an input is energy, whether that be the spiritual power we use as Yukai, or the chakra that ninja use. Ryu explained. Now, can you think of what the three most easily used outputs are? Naruto frowned and thought. Fire? He asked. Ninja can spit fire, can't they? Ryu chuckled. Good guess, and your example displays all three things, but an element wasn't what I was thinking of. Would you like to guess again? Wind? Naruto tried. Close yet again, but not quite what I wanted. Ryu said. The three simplest expressions of energy are motion, heat, and light. Wind can blow things along, and fire provides both heat and light. Ryu held up a hand, and after a few moments of concentration, a ball of blue-white light hovered over his palm. Here we have light. He then dismissed it before placing his palm against Naruto's cheek, which proceeded to warm up far quicker than was normal. Here we have heat. He took his hand away from Naruto before pointing it at a low-hanging tree branch. A burst of wind blew several leaves off the tree. There we have motion. That was awesome, Naruto exclaimed, his earlier tears already forgotten. Can you teach me how to do that? Can you? Ryu laughed lightly. Calm yourself, Naruto, and yes, I can teach you. However, you may wish to ask Hino for lessons instead of myself. She is as close to a scholar as Yukai get, and she knows far more than the basic tricks I can do. The only reason I am Lord of the Forest and not her is simply down to the fact I am stronger than she is. If it ever came to a fight between us, though, I am far from certain about my victory over her. Would she teach me? Naruto wondered aloud. Benio, finally having enough, transformed back into her usual form and snorted. Hino would love having a brat to teach. Like Lord Ryu said, she is as close to a scholar as we have, and she would delight in having someone to talk to about all of those musty scrolls she keeps. Always so quick to denigrate, Benio. Ryu sighed. That mouth of yours will get you into trouble you can't get out of one day. What does denigrate mean? Naruto asked curiously. It means she has a sharp tongue, always ready to insult someone. Ryu told him. She's a good sort though, and her words hide who she truly is, a good and loyal Yukai. Lord Ryu. Benio stammered, her cheeks red. The winged Yukai chuckled. It is true, Benio. But that's no reason to. She trailed off. Naruto gave her a look. Are you alright, Benio? He asked her. Benio huffed, before grabbing Naruto and rubbing her knuckles into his scalp. I'm fine, brat, but you're not going to be so if you ask me that again. Careful with your new friend, he's not as durable as we are. Ryu chastised the butterfly Yukai. Of course he's not, humans are such fragile things. Benio retorted, as easily snapped as a twig and alive only as long as a Yukai's single breath. Ryu watched as Benio let out a yelp when Naruto's flailing legs caught her in the shins, making her drop him and hop about on one leg for a moment. The two of them seemed to forget he was there as Benio proceeded to chase Naruto all around the forest and nearby clearing. Ryu smiled. It looked like the next few years were going to be quite interesting. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Sandaime Hokage of Konoha, frowned in worry and concern. Over the last few months he'd noticed a change in one particular inhabitant of his village. He'd kept as close of an eye on Naruto as he could, both because of his own fondness for the blonde, as well as believing it his duty to his successor cum predecessor, the Yondaime Hokage, Minato Namikaze, Naruto's father. From what he'd heard, the boy had thrown himself into his studies at school, learning as much as he could as quickly as he could, and while his diligence was commendable, his social life had suffered even more than it already had. Not that Naruto really had a social life. Even before Naruto's change in behavior, there was no one really who the small boy interacted with. His status as a Jinchuriki alone scared a lot of people away from him. Civilians knew virtually nothing of the workings of ninjutsu or genjutsu, and the art of fuinjutsu was even more mystical to them, and as was human nature, they did not trust what they did not comprehend. On top of that, Naruto's frequent tales of monsters only he seemed able to see had further served to isolate the boy, and even those that might have given him a chance otherwise were driven away. Finding no friends among the children his age, Hiruzen knew that Naruto had begun to spend his time amongst the trees and the animals therein. Now, however, Naruto rarely left the woods. He ate in the orphanage, learned at school, and disappeared amongst the trees for the rest of the day, and often nights. It was becoming more and more rare for him to even come back to the orphanage to sleep, and he'd heard that the matrons were wondering if he still counted as being under their care. Hiruzen had a sort of answer to that. Minato had had an apartment when he was a genin, one he'd kept up on payments for as he'd advanced up the ranks. Even when he and Kushina had bought a house together, one that had been destroyed by the Kyuubi, he'd still had that apartment, and had in fact bought it rather than kept renting it. Perhaps it was time for Naruto to move out of the orphanage, and into his father's apartment. No one would remember whose it had been, so they weren't likely to discover the connection between the two blondes, and as Minato was now dead, the apartment was technically now Naruto's. However, could Naruto be self-sufficient enough to look after himself? The boy had no knowledge of how to cook or clean, and there was the matter of having to pay bills, namely water and electricity. Heating wasn't much of a problem in Konoha, as the land of fire in general had very mild winters. Hiruzen sighed. Glancing at the stack of paperwork on his desk, he then looked back at the crystal ball he had set on his desk. Grumbling about paperwork being able to wait, he tried to get a lock on Naruto using his telescope technique jutsu. However, it proved difficult. Whenever Naruto disappeared into the forest, he had quite a bit of difficulty finding him, and he often had to manually scan the forest a section at a time to find the boy. It was strange though, if he didn't know better he'd say that something was interfering with his jutsu, like the trees themselves were shielding Naruto from whomever might be trying to find him. Hiruzen despaired over Naruto ever gaining a friend within the village. It seemed to him that, even if he hadn't left the village, they had driven him out. Thankfully, the few times he'd seen him, the blonde had still been his cheerful self, but there were a few more oddities that had cropped up. Hiruzen had, of course, subtly encouraged him to become a shinobi. Naruto was a Jinchuriki, and there was no way he could become a civilian with a beast like that sealed inside of him, and as much as Hiruzen was fond of Naruto, he was also the Hokage, and that meant making tough decisions. Naruto's enthusiasm for the tales he'd told him had eased his mind about Naruto being made a shinobi, and yet, recently he'd been asking some very odd questions. Rather than heroic tales of rescuing princesses, Naruto had asked to hear about the most recent shinobi war, of Tsukumo Hitaki, and of Hanzo the Salamander. Naruto must have been reading quite a bit of Konoha's history to come across those two names. Nevertheless, Hiruzen had indulged him, and told Naruto of two of the strongest men he'd known. He'd told the boy of how Tsukumo had valued his comrades' lives above that of a completed mission, and of his proficiency in kenjutsu, as well as the other ninja arts. He regaled the boy with tales of Hanzo's strength, his strong bond with his summons, and the way he wished for peace despite being so accomplished at waging war. Naruto's questions had then taken an even stranger twist. He'd asked what sort of missions ninjas of different ranks undertook, and Hiruzen had told him. C-rank missions were the most common for all ranks, aside from fresh genin who had to contend with D ranks. Occasionally a Chunin team would take a B rank, while Jonin would take a ranks every now and then. He'd told Naruto about the different divisions as well, the cryptology department, the administrative group, the medical organization, the hunters, and so on and so forth. Part of Hiruzen was actually quite pleased that someone was taking such an interest in ninja that wasn't purely based around field shinobi teams, and it spoke well of Naruto's developing mind. Still, something seemed off about Naruto, something was different, but what it was he could not even guess. Naruto at least seemed happier than he had before, but that did only so much to quell the unease that Hiruzen felt. That unease did anything but abate whenever he caught sight of that butterfly that had spent the last few months riding around on top of Naruto's head. That was not natural behavior for a butterfly, and he'd wondered for a time if it was a summon. Naruto having formed a contract with a summon clan would explain a number of things, including his questions about some of the famous ninja he'd asked about. It would also explain why his jutsu was so often unable to find Naruto. It had a limited range after all, and the summon realm was not inside of that. If Naruto was reverse summoned by the butterflies every day, it would make sense that he couldn't find him, and Hiruzen would not discourage him. Well, he might insist that Naruto spent more time in the village. He didn't want the boy growing apart from humans, but that in itself was difficult. What friends did Naruto have amongst humans? Himself, the Hokage? He could only devote so much time per month to one boy, and that was precious little. If he made friends amongst the summons, would he ever want to come back to the human world? So far, it seemed Naruto was quite happy coming to school, and indeed his focus on learning and his drive of self-improvement was greater than it had ever been before, but he wasn't staying around after school to play with children his own age. Even during lunchtime, he sat apart from others. Perhaps when Naruto joined the Ninja Academy in 3 years he would find people he could get along with. After all, ninja had weird habits and wouldn't discriminate against him because of them, and on top of that, the clan children wouldn't be as wary of him as the civilian ones would. Their parents having a greater understanding of Fuinjutsu, and just what a Jinchuriki actually was, and therefore wouldn't warn their children away from him. Yes, that's what he would do, wait and hope for the best. If things got worse though, then, perhaps he would do something else. For Naruto, the past few months had been absolutely brilliant. Like Ryu had suggested, he worked hard in his lessons at school, and while the teachers didn't like him, they had not sabotaged him, allowing him to learn more and more as quickly as he could manage. He'd also asked Hino to teach him things, and she had agreed as well. The lessons with her were very different to the ones in school. The first thing she tried to teach was how to separate his spiritual power from his physical power. Chakra, what naturally flowed through his body, was a mixture of both, but all of the things Hino could teach him would only work with one of them. It had taken him 2 full months to be able to do as Hino asked, and even then it was a very difficult thing for Naruto to do. Not to mention that it just felt so wrong. Humans weren't purely spiritual creatures like yokai were, and every time he practiced what Hino taught him, while it did get easier, it felt like he was twisting something inside of himself. Now that he was capable of doing it quickly enough for Hino to judge it usable, even if it was only barely, she was going to teach him the next step in his learning, actually doing something with that energy he'd managed to call up. She sat him down next to herself, and drew a design on a torn-off section of a scroll. Right, Naruto, what I've drawn is a very basic seal, and it is composed of 3 parts. Would you care to take a guess as to what each part is? Hino asked him. Remembering what Ryu had told him several months back, Naruto answered her. Is it input, process, and output? Hino blinked in surprise. That is correct, Naruto. Here, let me show you. She indicated one part of the seal. This is where you push your spiritual power in. Take note of the shape of it, how everything is focused inwards from the outside of the symbol, pulling things into the middle. She indicated the next part. This is the process. Notice how it changes, how one side becomes the other gradually. She then pointed at the 3rd section. Now see how the symbol here is expanding, pushing outwards from the middle. Do you see it? I do. Naruto confirmed. So what does the seal actually do? Not much right now, it is incomplete. Can you guess what is missing? Hino asked. Naruto didn't know and told her as much. Never mind, Naruto, I'm surprised you could tell me as much as you did. Hino ruffled his hair with one hand. Now, what is missing is the binding part of the seal, what will transform it from a series of disconnected symbols into something that actually does something. With that, Hino traced a circle around the symbols and channeled a small amount of her own power into it. The paper writhed and twisted for a moment as the symbols seemingly faded and lines of ink spread around the whole thing. Eventually it settled, and the paper was left with 2 circles on it, one on each side. One circle was filled in with ink, making it black, while the other was just an outline. Right, Naruto, pass your hand here. The blonde obeyed the blue-haired Yukai, who put the paper against the palm of his hand before tying it on properly. Now, call up some of your spiritual power, and push it into the circle against your palm. She told him. Naruto did that. Being as still and as silent as he could, he reached inside himself and quickly found his chakra. Visualizing it as a rope made up of many different strands, some light blue, almost white, and others a darker, almost green, blue, he began to try and pry a few of the lighter colored strings away from it. Just like every other time he did this, Naruto felt the uncomfortable sensation of separating his yin from his yang, but he nevertheless managed to do so. Carefully guiding the blue-white strands of spiritual power along his arm and out of the palm of his hand, Naruto opened his eyes in time to see a bush near them be stripped of some leaves as a blast of wind shot out of the other side of the seal on his hand. Well done, Naruto, you did it exactly right. Hino congratulated him. The seal transformed your energy into motion and expelled it on the other side of itself. Motion is considered one of the safest energy transformations to practice, and also requires the least control. Awesome, Naruto exclaimed, a wide grin splitting his face in two. Oh, don't get too far ahead of yourself, Naruto, we've got a lot of work to do before we move on any further than this. Hino chastised him. We need you to call up your power a lot faster, and you're going to have to learn how to control this before we move on to anything else. How long will that take? Naruto whined. Oh, I'd say a good few months before we can safely move on to light. Hino told him. We don't want to blind anyone after all, and light requires more control than motion does. A few months after that and we might be able to safely move on to heat as well. You've got a very long way to go yet, Naruto, but don't despair, you've taken your first steps, and they're amongst the most important. Naruto smiled at her, earning himself another ruffle of his hair. Now let's try it again, and try to be quicker about it. We can worry about control when you can call up your power within a second or less. Hino commanded him. If you get it down well enough, I'll let you go see the Kappa again. Tsuyukami tells me they want to see you again, and I know you had fun with them last time. Naruto smiled and got back to work. Truly, fortune was smiling on him now. It was early October now, and Naruto would be 6 in a few days. It had been almost half a year since Naruto had first met Benio and the other Yukai, and the blonde boy was very happy. He'd applied himself in his lessons and was advancing rapidly on the human side of things. He'd memorized all of the hiragana alphabet, and because it was a phonetic lettering system, all he'd had to do after that was learn more words, which he did. Kanji was another matter though, and while he was making progress, it was nowhere near as easy as other things he was learning. Speaking of other things he was learning, Hino still had him on the same exercise she'd had him doing for a while now. While he could now call upon his spiritual power in around a second when he was calm and relaxed, he had trouble doing so when he couldn't focus on it, such as when he was dodging balls that the Kappa threw at him, the childish Yukai treating his training as a sort of game. His control also slipped when he wasn't focused, and the blast he fired was sometimes strong enough to knock an unsuspecting Ryu off his feet, which Naruto had apologized profusely for, or it was weak enough to not even rustle the leaves in a bush. Still, being able to do something awesome like fire blasts of force from his hands was amazing to Naruto, especially when Hino had copied the seal she'd used onto a pair of fingerless gloves that Naruto had taken to wearing all the time. They were black, like his shirt, with the word Yukai on the back, written in the Yukiza's own language. That was one of the other things that Naruto had been learning, the written form of the Yukai language. While they spoke Japanese, or at least what sounded like Japanese to Naruto's ears, their written language was totally different, and while Naruto could somehow naturally read it, writing it was another matter. It was useful though, because it was what all of the seals Hino knew was based in, unlike human seals which had a kanji base to them, and were structured completely differently to Yukai seals. Naruto wanted to learn human seals as well, but unfortunately he didn't have access to any way of learning them. He'd have to wait until he was a genin to have access to even basic stuff for ninjas, beyond the academy gradebooks. Aside from the writing the Yukai used in controlling his spiritual power, the only other thing that Naruto was learning from them right then was what Hino called alchemy, which was the mixing of ingredients and spiritual power to produce something useful. It sounded amazing to him that he could brew potions that could heal people, cure illnesses, or even do something crazy like allow someone to breathe underwater or turn invisible. Of course, before he could do anything like that, he first had to know what reagents he was working with. To that end, he'd started putting together a notebook of everything he learned in these lessons. On each page, he'd have the name of an ingredient, its positive and negative effects, how it could be used, and if he could get hold of a bit of it, a preserved sample as well. So far, he mostly had different parts of different plants in there, but his notes also mentioned the different uses of things like blood, both yokai and human, as well as insects, animal bones, and other things. Hino had said that, for his birthday, she would watch over him as he brewed his first potion. Granted, it was only going to be a mild fortifying draft, and wouldn't do much more than make him slightly faster and stronger for a few hours, but that was still amazing by itself. He was really looking forward to that, but for now, he had school to get to. Splash! Sputtering and cold, Naruto's eyes flew open as he shot up. Shaking his now soaked hair and wiping the water out of his eyes, Naruto pouted at the small group of kappa around him, as well as Benio who was cackling away in a tree. Come on, Brad, your school starts in 2 hours, and these guys want to play with you before you go. Benio called out to him. Naruto stood up and looked at the tree he'd spent the night under. He only really slept at the orphanage now when the weather was too bad for a human to sleep through the night. He grumbled to himself about it being too early in the morning, before spinning on the spot and running at the nearest kappa with his arms reaching forwards. With a delighted laugh, the kappa began running away from the blonde boy and towards the small lake where they lived. Chasing them the whole way, Naruto also let out a happy laugh, this being something he hadn't been able to do before meeting the local yokai, what with other children not being friends with him. When they got to the lake, the kappa dived right in, followed immediately by Naruto, who had been taught to swim by the kappa themselves. They spent more than half an hour swimming around in the lake, playing an unusual form of tag, though who exactly was up for debate. Hey, Naruto. One of the kappa called out when Naruto got out of the water to get ready for school. We heard a rumor about a strong water yokai being seen a couple of miles away, and we were thinking of going to see if the rumors are true. You want to come with us? I've got school now, and my lessons with Hino after that, but if you can wait that long then sure, it sounds great. Naruto replied. Sure, we'll wait, but Kappa replied. We were going to ask one of the stronger yokai to come with us anyway, in case there was trouble. Maybe lazy Madara will even go with us if we can find enough sake to bribe him with, or something sweet. Madara, who's he? Naruto asked, not recognizing the name, and by now he'd met most of the local yokai. He's an Inagami, and he's really powerful, but all he does is sleep and drink. One of the other kappa told him. He snagged some stuff off a human merchant's wagon before, and he loves, what's it called, manju? I've never had it before. Naruto admitted, but I think that's what it's called. Hey, that's an idea, one of the kappa said. Manju is a human food, so maybe Naruto can get some for us to bribe Madara with. Sorry, guys, but I don't have any money. Naruto apologized. Money? One of the kappa asked. You mean those round bits of metal with human writing on them? You also get Ryo bills, but yeah, those are coins. Naruto answered them. Humans drop them and leave them lying around all over the place. The kappa exclaimed. We have a plan. While Naruto is at school, we'll go and collect all of the lost and forgotten coins we can. Then Naruto can buy manju for Madara, and we can go see what's going on with these rumors. Without another word, the group of kappa charged headlong towards the village, leaving Naruto to wonder what the hell just happened. Are they going to spend all day looking for loose change? He wondered. He shook his head. It wasn't important, and he had to get ready for school anyway. The school teacher gave Naruto an odd look as she saw his eyes, once again, focus on something outside of the window, but when she looked herself, she didn't see anything. Maybe it was a ninja doing their roof hopping thing or something. It would make sense for Naruto to see that. Being a fighter was in his blood after all. Oh, Akiko recognized the name Uzumaki, she definitely did. She remembered the red-haired ninja woman quite clearly, and if someone actually looked at Naruto then they would see that he had the same shaped face she did. In fact, he looked a lot like her aside from the hair and eye color. That was why she didn't give him as hard of a time as she heard some of the other teachers did. While he was an orphan with no parents, she thought it far more likely that he was the son of Kushina Uzumaki, and probably one of the Yamanaka ninjas. They were mostly blondes. Rather than a demonic fox forced into human form with its memories erased, or whatever the current theory was. In fact, Akiko was actually secretly rather proud of her blonde student. The way he dove into learning everything he could really impressed her, and she found herself occasionally slipping a slightly more advanced textbook into the ones she placed on his desk, and adding an extra sheet or two of homework for him to complete, which he always did. With his determination and drive, he was going to go far in life, whatever he decided to do with himself. She saw Naruto's eye twitch again, and once more glanced outside the window, completely missing the Kappa running about the place with a bag full of loose change. At lunchtime, Naruto sat apart from the children, took his lunch out of his bag, and put Benio, in butterfly form, on his knee. As he ate his lunch, he wondered just how much money the Kappa would have managed to gather by the time he would finish his lessons with Hino. "Hey, Benio, I didn't think of this, but maybe the manju place won't serve me properly. Can you transform into some random civilian and buy the manju for us?" Naruto asked. "What's in it for me, brat?" Benio asked. "Some of the manju, maybe?" Naruto shrugged. "You saw as well as I did just how much money the Kappas seem to have collected. That'll get us a fair number of manju, and this Madara won't know the difference between however many we give him and how many we bought." Tempting. Benio mused. "I've never had this manju stuff either, but if Madara likes it so much, then maybe it's worth a try." "Do you know Madara then?" Naruto asked. "I do, and he's possibly even more powerful than Lord Ryu." Benio told him. "Really?" Naruto's eyes glittered at that. "I thought Ryu was super powerful." "Well, he is compared to the small fry," Benio admitted. "However, as a lord amongst yokai, he's actually on the lower end of the scale. Raka is more powerful than he is, and so is Misuzu. Madara doesn't actually rule over anyone, so he's not a lord, but that doesn't stop him being really powerful anyway." "Why doesn't he rule over anyone if he's that powerful?" Naruto frowned. "Why doesn't he know? She's about on the same level as Ryu." Naruto then saw what it would look like if a butterfly attempted to shrug. Madara is also a bit grumpy, and with his laziness, there's not many that really want him as a lord. As he's never really bothered trying to rule over anyone, he's kind of just there really. He's not part of Ryu's underlings, but he lives nearby anyway, so he sort of is and isn't counted amongst us. "Okay then." Naruto shrugged. "So, will you buy the manju in my place?" Benio sighed. "Fine, I'll possess someone and buy some, but I'll snag one or two myself just so you know. With how much I saw the Kappa have been collecting, I think we'll have plenty to go around." Naruto told her. "Very well then." Benio agreed. "While you are at your lessons with Hino, I will purchase these manju you and the Kappa want to bribe Madara with. Also, I shall accompany you as you investigate these rumors of a strong yokai." Naruto snorted. "Wouldn't have it any other way, Benio, you've barely left my side since I met you." The blonde continued to eat his lunch while chatting quietly with the butterfly yokai, but his thoughts were focused on what he and the Kappa were going to be up to later, and just what this Madara person was like. After school was over with, Naruto headed to where he knew Hino would be waiting for him while Benio went off to find where all of the Kappa were so she could buy the manju they needed. When he got to where Hino was waiting for him, Naruto was surprised to see that she had a new scroll out that he didn't recognize. Normally she had the one that she taught him the force technique from, so he could check up on it when he felt himself getting frustrated with his progress. This one, even if he couldn't see much of it, was a different one. Hino tossed something small and round to him, which he caught. When he took a look at it, he found it was a wooden ball, about the size of a tennis ball, with symbols cut into the surface of it. Unlike his gloves, which had 3 symbols and a binder, this one was unbound with 5. "Tell me what you can work out of that seal," Hino told him. Naruto took another look at it before answering. "Well, there's the input part of it here, then 2 symbols I don't recognize. After that is one that looks like the changing symbol that my gloves use, but different, and lastly there's an output symbol, but that's also different to the one on my gloves. Can you guess the purpose of any of the new symbols?" Hino asked him. Well, the output seal is round, like the ball, so that means the direction is outwards?" Naruto guessed. "Am I going to have to try and hover this ball over my hand or something? Is it a control exercise?" "That's a good idea, but no, it's not." Hino then corrected him. "You're right in that the last symbol sends the result outwards in all directions, But the conversion symbol isn't a motion one, but a light one. The symbols you don't recognize at all represent storage and regulation. Now can you guess how this works? Well, the input is still spiritual energy. Naruto started. Then the storage part holds it and the next symbol leaks it out a bit at a time. The converter symbol then turns it into light, and the final symbol makes the entire ball light up. Correct. Hino confirmed. Now pass it back so I can bind it all together. Naruto tossed it to her, and she caught it, before taking a knife to the wooden ball. Now, I've decided to move on to light for 2 reasons. 1. The only way you're going to get better at motion is with practice, and 2. After this we are going to be working on combinations. Combinations? Naruto asked. You mean, with seals and techniques? Seals primarily. Hino answered. Once I think you've gotten light down well enough and know the symbols used, I'm going to give you a little project. I want you to make your own light orb, but rather than simply glowing like this one will, I want it to also hover over your shoulder. Can you guess how that will work? Naruto thought about it for a moment. Well, it'll use the stuff on that one to actually light up, and it'll need constant motion to stay over my shoulder? I'm guessing that'll need both storage and regulator symbols, won't it? Once again, correct. Hino told him. Once you learn to start creating entire seals from individual symbols, then seals are like another language entirely, with plenty of grammar rules and everything else. She huffed. I took a look in a shinobi store earlier, and all of their seals are standardized things, primarily explosions and item storage. Wait, you can put actual physical things in a seal? Naruto wondered. I thought you could only store energy and spiritual things in them? Human seals are different to yokai seals, remember? Hino reminded him. Theirs includes a physical aspect to them, which means they're constructed differently and can do different things. Naruto huffed. I want to learn them though. Yeah, just remember not to share your seals with others. Because ours are purely spiritual, they'll react really badly to mixed chakra, and it'd probably be best to avoid awkward questions. Hino cautioned him. Now, carefully start feeding your spiritual power into the ball, and let's see how well you can work with light. Hino watched in silence as Naruto sat down cross-legged, with one arm held out, palm up. On that hand was the wooden ball that he was using as a medium for the technique. She knew he could call up his spiritual power, his Riryoku, in a mere second when he had the chance to focus on it, but it looked like he was being cautious with a new technique. That was good. Recklessness was almost never a positive trait, especially when you were dealing with something you weren't familiar with, and she approved of the way he was working. A moment later, the wooden ball began to light up in Naruto's hand, and the boy himself opened his eyes. Well done, Naruto, you did it. Hino congratulated him. Now, before going any further, can you tell me what 2 things about your spiritual power affect the light ball, and how they affect it? Well, there's the amount I put in there. Naruto said. The more I put in, the longer the light lasts. Up to a limit, yes. Put too much in and you'll overload it. Hino added. What about the other thing? The quality of the power? Naruto guessed. Sort of. Hino granted him some leeway. It's the density of the power, just how much of it you can compress into each drop of spiritual power you use. The denser it is, the brighter the light will be, and vice versa. As you can see, the light is quite bright, showing us that your spiritual power, and likely your chakra overall, is quite dense, more so than the average human at least. Naruto gave her a confused look. How do you even know what's normal for a human? I thought that yokai tended to keep their distance. Oh, we all have our secrets, Naruto. Hino smiled. Now, keep practicing with that light ball. See if you can cause it to brighten and dim, or if you're really feeling good at it, try and work out how to change the color of the light. As Naruto went back to his task, Hino's eyes darkened. She knew as much as she did about how humans worked from those notes she'd looked over. Those labs that Ryu had come across belonged to Orochimaru, a rather despicable human if ever there was one, and his experiments could be roughly broken down into 3 categories. The first lot of experiments were attempts to extend a human's lifespan indefinitely, immortality in short. Some of the corpses she'd looked at had been horrifically deformed, their cells having mutated in strange ways due to what had been done to them, and their expressions had been twisted by agony. The second set of experiments Orochimaru had done had involved inserting genetic patterns from other humans into his test subjects, attempting to graft bloodlines onto the bodies. From the notes she'd read, Hino had found out that he was actually starting to have some successes, even if the survival rate was lower than 3%. The third group of test subjects was the one that Hino was focused on at present. Orochimaru had created a seal that was absolutely beautiful in effect, if rather crude in the way it was constructed. The seal had many layers to it, the first of which was a simple chakra storage seal. An attached layer was a compression seal, to increase the potency of the stored chakra, while a third layer facilitated the absorption of nature chakra. After that is where things get weird. The seal also contained some form of biological mutagen that forced the recipient's body to change. On top of that, there was a final layer of the seal, one that attacked the mind of the one it was attached to. That last layer of the seal tried to make the carrier submissive and loyal to Orochimaru. Hino actually wanted to steal parts of that seal to make something new. After all, having a chakra battery you can use is never a bad thing, and making senjutsu easier is hardly a bad thing. Heck, if you can find something compatible for the body mutation part of it, like something with wings, then that could be useful too. The problem was that human seals, unlike Yukai ones, required a certain balance, and she couldn't remove the subjugation aspect of the seal without collapsing the whole thing, and she didn't know enough about human sealing methods to construct something to replace it. Perhaps when Naruto gained access to the relevant materials she might pick that project up again. For now though, she had plenty to teach to her student. After his lessons with Hino were over, where he practiced the light ball thing, his force blast technique, and revised the different plant reagents he knew, Naruto headed straight towards the Kappa's lake, where he found them waiting for him alongside Benio, who had a large bag of manju with her. I can see why Madara likes these so much, she told him when she saw him. They are certainly quite delicious. Was there any problems getting them? Naruto asked. None, really. Benio waved him off. I just transformed into a random human, black hair, brown eyes, and so on and so forth. The effort it took me to do so reminded me just how long it's been since I've made myself visible to humans in any form other than as a butterfly. Anyway, I think the woman was more annoyed by me paying for the manju with so much small change than anything else, but she accepted the coins regardless. Well, that's okay then. Naruto shrugged. Shall we take these to Madara and see if he'll take us to this place? And I just realized I don't know where Madara is or where we're supposed to be going. I know where Madara will be lazing around right now. Benio offered. And we know where we're going. The Kappa chorused. Well, shall we get going then? Naruto asked. Follow me then, Benio said, before heading deeper into the forest. Naruto and the group of Kappa followed her, greeting a few of the other yokai they met along the way. Naruto, to keep himself busy, practiced using his light ball, awing the Kappa who, as rather low-class spirits, didn't really use any techniques at all, though they could do a few tricks with water, which they promised to try and teach Naruto to do. Naruto absolutely loved the Kappa. They were just so childish, they were like kids his own age, and they were a lot of fun as well. All of the yokai filled a role with Naruto. Hino was his teacher, but she was also the most maternal influence he had. Tsuyukami was like a father, or maybe an uncle, always willing to listen, and always with a bit some advice to give. Ryu was more distant, but he was still there, even if he had some other duties to attend to. The Kappa were like the friends he didn't have amongst humans, and Benio, she was harder to describe. She irritated Naruto, and he played tricks on her in return. The both of them had this need to annoy one another, but Benio was also the first one to speak up for him against someone else, and Naruto looked up to her a bit, though he'd never say that out loud. The other yokai around the forest were like his neighbors, or people who lived down the street from him. Vaguely friendly and polite, but not people he was particularly close to or knew much about. He had yet to meet any yokai outside of Ryu's domain, not even Raka's, so he didn't know how that would turn out, but he hoped things wouldn't go too badly, and there was no way he was going there alone until he could look after himself. Madara should be just ahead. Benio called out to them. The clearing ahead is one of his favorite places to nap in the sun. Naruto went on ahead of the others, and when he came out from the trees and into the clearing he had to stop in surprise. Madara was a lot fluffier than he was expecting, and he was quite large as well. He took the form of a large white canine, who could probably have swallowed a grown man whole given his size. He had yellow-brown eyes and red markings on his head. There was a design similar to a question mark in the middle, with 3 flecks at the top and a pattern around the curve of it and a dot in the middle. There was also red around his eyes, following the natural lines of his face. Madara? Naruto murmured quietly, somewhat in awe of the yokai before him. Madara had sensitive hearing though, and replied, "Who wants to know? I don't recognize you." Naruto found Madara's deep, growling voice to be quite rich and appropriate for such a being. I'm Naruto, Naruto Uzumaki. I don't know if you've heard of me or anything. The human who isn't blind. Madara said. Yes, I know who you are, but why are you here? Well, the Kappa heard a rumor about a powerful water yokai being nearby, and he wanted to check it out, but we didn't want to take too much of a risk, so he thought about asking if you wouldn't mind watching out for us on this trip. Naruto told him, I'm not a babysitter, brat, find someone else to do it, I'm not interested. Madara replied, we have manju. Naruto offered, we heard you liked the stuff, so, if you take us, you can have the manju. Now Madara appeared interested, how much manju? Benio, could you bring them over here? Naruto asked. Sure. Benio answered, carrying the large bag of manju over to them. Here, a bag full of manju for you. Madara, are you interested now? How far did you want to go? He asked. The rumors have the newcomer in the river at the Valley of the End. One of the Kappa offered. Madara nodded. That's not too far then, we can be there and back again in a few hours. Madara was then covered in a large amount of gray smoke, from which appeared a Maneki Neko? Madara then proceeded to pull several manju out of the bag and begin to eat them. Naruto wasn't the only one shocked by the transformation. Even Benio's jaw had dropped in shock at seeing the great and powerful Madara turn into a little, fat cat. Madara, is there any reason you changed form into, well, that? Naruto asked as politely as he could while his brain tried to superimpose the great and powerful yokai he'd seen a moment ago over this. Idiot. If I'm large, the manju wouldn't even be a mouthful. Madara told him. Like this, it'll last me a few days. Naruto leaned towards Benio and whispered to her. I'm not imagining his voice changing like that, am I? No, I can hear the whiny noise too. Benio replied, still in shock. Madara finished devouring a third manju before he turned to his observers. Let me just hide these and we can be on our way. The yokai said, before hopping off through the trees. When he returned, barely a minute later, he was once again the massive Inagami they'd first seen him as. Get on my back, he told them. The quicker we leave and return, the sooner I can get back to my delicious manju. Naruto and Benio climbed on behind Madara's head, and the half a dozen Kappa climbed on behind them as well, and they all held on as tightly as they could as Madara leapt into the air. So, to the Valley of the End it is then. Madara said, before beginning to fly off in that direction, though how exactly he could fly without wings or anything, Naruto didn't know. Perhaps it was a yokai skill, and maybe Hino could teach him how to do it himself. Flying was awesome after all. Back at Naruto's school, the teacher known as Akiko was marking homework. It was dull, repetitive work, but it had to get down, and she always did it as soon as she could, so it was done and out of the way. She had just finished marking one of her students' pieces, who needed to work on adding repeated values, or beginner multiplication as it were, when she moved on to Naruto's. She quickly went through it, marking down everything as correct, before she took note of what else was doodled on the page. There were a few random squiggles and symbols that looked like they were supposed to mean something, but while she was curious about them, that wasn't what really caught her attention. No, what caught her attention was a slightly damp handprint, one that was not human, and most definitely not Naruto's. After all, Naruto didn't have webbed fingers, did he? Naruto looked on in wonder as the land of fire was laid out below him like a living map, though it was so much more than just that. He could see everything for hundreds of miles around, and more than that, he could see things shift and move. He could see flocks of birds, and even some bird-type yokai flying at a lower altitude. He could see mountains, and even one that he had to take a second look at. Yokai pretending to be a mountain. The sheer power it must have to not only be a physical part of the landscape, especially with as large as it was, but to also force regular humans to ignore its obviously non-mountainous features. It chilled Naruto to the bone. It also brought to life just how real yokai were to him. They were not the monsters he'd thought of them as before, and they were not human by any stretch of the imagination, no matter how many traits of his race they echoed. No, they were beings that existed alongside humanity, but who followed different rules, whose minds and bodies were not things that could be easily comprehended by a human. They were yokai, and that was that. It wouldn't change how he interacted with them. He wasn't suddenly afraid of them, but neither did have a sudden respect for them. Anyone who'd seen the Kappa playing around and having fun would have trouble with this. What he had was an understanding of them. It's so beautiful, Naruto murmured, looking at the country from high in the air. Now, where's the Valley of the End? Ahead of us, look for the waterfall and statues. Madara told him. I think I can see the mist from the waterfall. Naruto said. I'm guessing that's where we're going to start the search for this water yokai. The closest Kappa nodded their head. Yeah, power gathers at waterfalls, so it's the best place to look for powerful, higher-level yokai. Huh? I didn't know that, Naruto commented, to which Madara snorted. Significant places always gather power. He told the blonde. Waterfalls, the centers of forests, the peaks of the highest mountains, the depths of the earth, the centers of lakes, and so on and so forth. I'd be surprised to not find a yokai or two in such places. So shouldn't there already be something at the valley then, before this new yokai moved here? Naruto wondered. Madara snorted. That valley wasn't always what it is now, and is actually younger than your home village. It was formed when two ninjas fought each other, don't ask me who, I don't remember, and so to us yokai, it's really new, so it's not too surprising that no one has taken it for their own until now. Naruto was silent as he thought about that. To really old beings, just how little did years mean? The old men around the village, Naruto had heard, complained about kids these days, back in the day, and stuff like that. How then would something that was hundreds of years old or more see the paltry few years that Naruto had been alive, or even how old the ninja villages were? Pay attention, kid, Madara called out to Naruto. We're almost there, and it'd be a shame for you to get eaten because you weren't paying attention, at least not before you can buy me more manju. Naruto smiled. I'll keep that in mind if I ever need your help again. Hey, you got yourself a deal, Blondie. Madara chuckled before heading back, starting to descend. Akiko, Naruto's teacher, had a troubled look on her face. Even though it had dried, she could still see the webbed handprint on Naruto's homework. It didn't look like a purposefully done prank, it was too irregularly shaped for that, and she could even see the contours of the hand. Naruto also wasn't one for mischief, he was too focused for that. She was actually reminded of the rumors she'd heard about Naruto, how he told tales of invisible monsters no one but he could see. Was this, somehow, proof of Naruto's claim? He'd calmed down quite a bit in the last half a year, and if he'd found a monster friend, or one that at least protected him. Of course, the real question wasn't about that, it was what was she going to do now? She could just ignore it, that was the simplest option, and everyone would just get on with their lives. She could bring her evidence to a higher power, the headmaster of the school, the village education board, or even the Hokage, and allow them to deal with it. However, Naruto was her favorite student, and while not everyone in the village hated the blonde child, there was most definitely animosity directed at him from other people, and she didn't know who bought into that hostility and who didn't, so passing on this information could be bad for Naruto. That left, what, confronting Naruto herself. What would she even say to him? Hey, Naruto, there's a webbed handprint on your homework, did a monster touch it? That sounded ridiculous, but Naruto was a child, and so asking directly might be the easiest way to get an answer. But then what? If Naruto's monsters turned out to be real, what would she do? She couldn't see them herself. Heck, as Naruto was the only one who had ever mentioned them, maybe he was the only one who could see them. So what then? If they'd been around as long as she imagined they had, if they actually were real, then they weren't particularly harmful to humans, were they? Even Naruto, who could see them, had never been physically harmed by them, only scared. Akiko sighed and groaned in frustration. She was a civilian teacher for goodness sake, not even a ninja instructor. Honestly, what was she doing contemplating the existence of invisible spirits that may or may not exist? Still, her own damned curiosity wouldn't let her leave it alone, so she had two choices. Either she confronted Naruto herself, or passed it up the chain. Which one should she go for? With his feet firmly on the ground, Naruto looked at the Valley of the End from a different perspective. Whereas from above, the statues either side of the waterfall had looked large, now they were absolutely massive. Hundreds of feet tall, they loomed menacingly above the shorter-than-average 5-year-old, despite the fact he was stood on a ledge that was about chest-high to them. Madara sniffed the air. There is definitely something here, and it's no weakling either. Is it really close? Naruto asked. Can you smell which direction it's in? Madara nodded. Yeah, it's close, and it's downwards, at the bottom of the waterfall. Naruto looked over the edge and gulped at how far down it was. However, he couldn't see anywhere to stand down there either. He said as much to Madara, who shrugged his shoulders. Humans have a trick that lets them walk on water, though I've no idea how they do so myself. He said, I know that one. One of the Kappa offered. They push their chakra out through their feet. Dunno how that makes them walk on water though, but that's how they do it. Naruto frowned. Wait, I thought chakra made them stick to things, isn't that how they run up and down trees and walls? Maybe it does both? One of the Kappa guessed. But sticking and pushing off are opposites of each other. A confused Naruto mumbled, we can find out how they do it later. Benio commented, just have the Kappa spy on one of the newer Genin teams and see what their teachers tell them to do. Weren't we supposed to be checking out rumors of a strong Ukai right now? But how can we check it out? Naruto asked. I can't get down there, and even if I could, I can't stand on water. I don't think the Kappa will be happy to go alone either. Madara huffed. Well, we could always try and get their attention, he said, before taking a deep breath. Madara then howled as loudly as he could, the sound echoing all around the valley of the end. As the sound faded, Benio turned to Madara with an incredulous expression on her face. Did you really just do that? She asked. We have a powerful Ukai who has just moved into the area, and you go and disturb them without even trying to find out anything more about them? I'm no weakling, we'll be fine. Madara huffed in response, with Naruto making a mental note about the Inagami's pride. Well, you definitely got their attention. Naruto commented, drawing the two's attention to the large body of water below them that was now roiling and shifting as whatever was below it rose to the surface. First, a serpentine head rose out of the water, followed by a similarly formed body. Large fins, or perhaps wings, appeared next, and kept on rising, higher and higher and higher. Naruto was frozen in shock. This Ukai, its head was larger than Madara was. It looked like it could swallow him whole in a single bite. And despite having risen up to the same level they were stood at, the back end of its body had yet to leave the water. Just how large was this water dragon? A Mizuchi. Benio breathed quietly. I had thought that they'd all died out. Who is it that disturbs me now? The massive creature grumbled, though Naruto thought it sounded rather tired in all honesty. Ah, Naruto, save us. The Kappa cried out, diving behind a confused Naruto, who wanted to know why they hid behind him instead of Madara. Hello there. Naruto started off awkwardly. Sorry about disturbing you. We heard rumors about a new Ukai moving in and decided to come say hello to our new neighbor. Naruto's explanation had the lilt of a question to it, as he wasn't exactly sure what he was saying. A human? The Mizuchi murmured, looking at Naruto. One that can see me? Yeah, my name's Naruto, what's yours? My name, it is Ran. The Mizuchi replied. Water lily, huh? Benio commented. Appropriate. Well, it's nice to meet you, Ran. Naruto waved at the Mizuchi, who appeared bemused by the blonde child. I hope you don't mind me asking, but why did you move here? I am not offended, Naruto. The Mizuchi shook her head. As for why I am here, I got fed up. Previously, I resided in Water Country, but the incessant fighting there annoyed me. I decided to find somewhere away from humans who did nothing but kill each other until the water I resided in turned red with their blood, and I found this place which is rich in power, and even better than that, currently uninhabited. I didn't know there was that much fighting going on in Water Country. Naruto said. I mean, the Third War was over years ago, wasn't it? Ran huffed. They fight amongst themselves. On one side are those whose blood tastes normal for a human, and the other side has strange flavors to their blood. She shook her massive head. I should know, their life fluid soaked my waters until I could hardly get the taste out of my mouth. Their blood had flavors? Naruto wondered. Bloodlines. Madara was the one to explain that. Unique abilities and affinities that are passed down from parent to child. Your village is full of them, you could probably even name the clans with bloodlines. Ah, you mean like the Uchiha, the Hyuga, and so on? Naruto asked. The red eyes and the white eyes, yes. Benio confirmed, having learned human stuff alongside Naruto as she was with him in his lessons, albeit as a butterfly that rested on his head. Those two were amongst the most well-known clans of Konoha, and even the civilian children knew about them, along with those such as the Senju and Sarutobi. Wait, does that mean the clans are fighting with their village in Water Country? Naruto asked. Why would they do that? The Mizuchi shrugged, the motion rolling along her serpentine body. I neither know, nor do I care. I would not have bothered with it if they kept it away from me, but I absolutely refuse to remain in those tainted waters any longer. It is unhygienic. Okay, I guess that's your choice. Naruto said. Well, it was nice to meet you anyway. If you feel like visiting, I live in Konoha, which is that way. He pointed towards the village. Though I don't know how you get there. The rivers are smaller than this one is. I appreciate the offer, little one. The Mizuchi said. However, I am powerful enough to transform myself if I wish to, and can shrink myself to a more reasonable size. Do not be a stranger here yourself. I received few enough visitors before, and hearing any stories you can tell me would be wonderful. Okay then, Naruto replied. I only really know a few stories about the village, but I'll see if I can find out some others for you. I look forward to an exchange of words with you. Ran bowed her head. For now though, I need to rest and recover. Farewell, Naruto. With that, Ren sank back beneath the water. Naruto turned to the others. Did you guys know about anything happening in Water Country? This sounds really important. I've been with you all the time, Brad. If you didn't hear anything, how could I? Benio shrugged. I rarely leave the forest. What would I hear, and why would I care what humans do to one another? Madara added. We've heard nothing, but we can find out. One of the Kappa chimed in. There's loads of Kappa in Water Country, so we can send a message to them and see what they can tell us. How are you going to send a message? Naruto asked. One of the Kappa shrugged. Plenty of bird-type yokai love flying all over the place. One of them will be happy to take it for us. Huh, that's pretty cool actually. Naruto said. I wonder which is faster, ninja courier or bird yokai. That's really great and everything, but can we head back now? Madara interrupted them. There's a bag full of manju just waiting for me back there. Very well, we did what we came here to do, let's go. Benio said, chivying the Kappa and Naruto onto Madara's back. Okay, chorused Naruto and the Kappa. The next day, when Naruto went to school, he noticed that the teacher looked rather distracted, and she kept shooting him looks as well for some reason. He racked his brain to think about anything he might have done to cause that, but kept coming up with a blank. At lunch, when he asked her, Benio couldn't think of anything either, and told him not to worry about it and just take things as they came. If the teacher had a problem with Naruto, well, they'd just have to straighten things out with her, wouldn't they? It wasn't likely that simply him being Naruto was a problem for her. She hadn't been acting like that just the day before. It wasn't until the end of the day that they got an answer though, when she asked Naruto to stay behind for a few minutes. As the other children filed out of the room, Naruto stood before the teacher's desk, and waited until all of the other kids had gone before asking her why she'd held him back and if he'd done something wrong. No, at least I don't think you have. Akiko answered him. It's just, as I was marking homework last night, I found something unexpected on yours, a handprint of sorts. It's just, this handprint wasn't normal, it was webbed, like a frog's feet are. Naruto paused, realizing that one of the Kappa must have left a handprint on his homework when they'd been asking him to come play with them. He hadn't noticed at the time, as he'd just finished his homework and was glad to have friends to play with. Now, Naruto, I'm not going to get mad, I'm not going to shout, and this is just between you and me, okay? Akiko took a breath. The monsters that I've heard you apparently talk about, they're real, aren't they? She stumbled over her words, as if she wasn't quite sure about the words that were coming out of her own mouth. Slowly, hesitantly, Naruto nodded his head. They say that they're actually yokai. He told her, though his voice was barely louder than a whisper. They do? Akiko asked, before seeing how Naruto was looking. Listen, Naruto, I understand that this might be hard to talk about. Goodness knows, no one had ever believed him before. Still, while this feels really weird to me, I'm not calling you a liar. However, I'd like to know how you can see them, if the yokai ever told you that. They don't know how I can see them, it confuses them too. Naruto answered, his voice regaining some of its strength. They said that people with the sight have pretty much died out, and that they only know of one person who might be able to see, and they're in Demon Country. I see, and are there any yokai around right now? Akiko asked. Only Benio here. Naruto indicated the butterfly on his head. Akiko looked confused. I thought yokai were invisible monsters only you could see? Benio doesn't normally look like this. Naruto told her. Stronger yokai can transform into things visible to humans, or even reveal themselves as they are. Here, watch Benio as she turns back into her true form. Obligingly, Benio cancelled her transformation, returning back to her female human-like form. To Akiko, it appeared as if the butterfly had suddenly vanished into thin air, and she whipped around looking for wherever it had gone. Wah! Benio's not the weakest yokai, but she's not super strong either, so she can only appear to humans as a small creature. And she likes to be a butterfly or dragonfly more than she likes being an ugly and unappealing bug. Akiko saw the butterfly then reappear on Naruto's head, settling back on his hair. Yesterday, you kept looking out of the window, and I couldn't see anything when I tried to look. Was that a yokai thing too? She asked. Yeah, Naruto admitted. The Kappa had heard a rumor of a strong water yokai being in the area, and they were gathering loose change to buy manju to bribe Madara with, so he'd take us to the Valley of the End. Madara? Valley of the End? Akiko had so many questions racing around inside her head. Yeah, Madara is an Inagami, and he's one of the strongest who lives nearby. Naruto told her, getting a bit more excited as he shared some of what he knew with another human, even if she was an adult. The Valley of the End is where the yokai was, a huge Mizuchi called Ran. That's nice, Akiko told him, in the tone of one who wasn't really sure how to respond. So yokai are your friends? Some of them are, Naruto replied. I've been told stories of some of the nastier ones though, and I'm going to have to learn how to look after myself before I meet any of them. Akiko inwardly raised an eyebrow. Hadn't he said, just a moment ago, that he'd gone looking for a new yokai at the Valley of the End? Or did he think that was safe because he had other yokai with him at the time? While Akiko had prepared herself to at least try and accept that there might be more to the world than she knew before the previous night, she'd not quite expected as much as Naruto was telling her. She'd thought, perhaps hoped, that if spirits actually existed, they'd be weak little apparitions that could do little more than scare someone, or might perhaps be as strong as a civilian. But it sounded like they were so much more than that. Akiko sighed. Naruto, I just have a few questions for you. Do you think you can answer them for me? Yeah, sure, Naruto responded. Right, first off, are you safe with the yokai? She asked. I am, Hino's even teaching me some awesome stuff, even if it's not very useful in a fight yet. Naruto nodded. Ignoring whoever this Hino was, or what sort of yokai she must be, Akiko asked her next question. Now, are you happy with the yokai? Of course I am, Naruto confirmed. Benio here is always with me, Hino is teaching me stuff, and I play with the Kappa and Kogitsune. I also get along with Madara, Ryu, and others as well. Good, Akiko replied, even if most of those names meant nothing to her. Now, is there anything you need that the yokai can't provide for you? Nothing that I know of, Naruto told her. Everything seems fine to me. Alright then, Naruto, thank you for telling me this. Akiko smiled at the boy. I won't pretend that I understand anything about your situation, but just know that if there's anything you need, and the yokai can't get it for you, come to me, and I'll see what I can do, okay? Okay, agreed Naruto. He was just about to turn and leave when he paused, and an odd look crossed his face, before he asked her something himself. Oh, Benio asks if you know why the villagers don't really like me that much. I do know why, Akiko hesitantly replied. However, I can't tell you. The Sandaime made it a law that no one is supposed to talk about it. I think he meant for you to have a more normal childhood than you did, but anyway, while I can't tell you why you're disliked, I can say that it's not something you did yourself, and your parents, if my guess is right, have nothing to do with it either. My parents? You know who they are? Naruto asked, eager to hear more, but was disappointed when Akiko shook her head. I don't know who they are, but if I were to guess, I'd say your mother is probably someone named Kushina Uzumaki. I could be wrong though, I have no way to be sure. She gave Naruto a sad smile, but he only grinned in response. Thank you, sensei, he called out, waving to her. It's more than I've ever heard before, so thank you. Akiko smiled as she watched Naruto walk out of the door, but once he was out of sight, she slumped in her seat. Seeing that child so happy to hear about his parents, only for her to give him what amounted to a guess, it was heartbreaking. Such a happy young child deserved so much more than that. To think, as well, that it wasn't even humans who were looking after him now, but yokai. What did it say about her species that another race entirely were looking after one of their own, one that was reviled and scorned in his own village, his own home? I am so not the person to deal with this, she muttered under her breath. However, regardless of her aptitude, she was the one who had chosen to deal with this. Naruto's birthday came, and as she promised, Hino watched over him as he created his first potion. He didn't ask where she got the metal pots he was using from. Just like he'd stopped asking where all those scrolls of hers came from. She would just give him a mysterious smile and evasive answer like she always did. "How are things going, Naruto?" Hino asked, keeping an eye on him. "The tree bark is boiling and the water's turning yellow. That means it's going well," Naruto said, looking at one that was essentially some sort of tea. "I've crushed the herbs I need and separated them into different small bowls. I've crushed the berries I need and extracted the juice. Finally, Ryu gave me a small vial of his blood to act as the spiritual reactant, as I'm not yet good enough to infuse it with my own spiritual energy." "Very good," Hino praised him. "Now, while you add the next reagent, can you tell me how many doses this will make, and how to safely consume them?" "I'm making enough for 20 doses," Naruto told her, adding the time. "Each dose should last around 4 hours, and I shouldn't take more than 3 doses per day, less if I take other potions." "Well done, Naruto." Hino smiled at him. "Now, this particular potion has a rather weak effect, and won't make you drastically stronger, faster, or more durable than you normally are. The advantages of it are that it's a very simple one to make, doesn't require extreme precision, and has very minor side effects if you overdose on it." "I know," Naruto said. "I want to work on healing potions next though." "I'll consider it," Hino told him. However, even the simplest of healing potions is far more complex and delicate than fortifying drafts. "I know," Naruto sighed, before cheering up. "I'm just glad that Akiko-sensei got me some ninja-grade poison vials for my birthday." "Well, you don't want them to break, do you?" Hino shrugged. "A potion is useless if you can't drink it. Maybe I can thank her by making her some tea." Naruto considered. "Hey, there's some teas which are really good for you, aren't there?" "There are, Naruto, even humans know that." Hino chuckled. "However, there are a few things we can do to make them more effective. Perhaps we can use that as your next little project instead of health potions. It's a much smaller step up in terms of difficulty." "Yeah, I'll do that then," Naruto affirmed, before going back to checking on his potion's progress. Hino hummed to herself, keeping an eye on Naruto and his brewing. "While we wait for the next step to be ready, why don't you practice with light a bit more? I heard from Benio that you'd thought of a way to practice both motion and light at the same time, care to share?" "Huh? Oh, that." Naruto perked up. "Well, I thought that, if a single blast blows things away, then a constant one should keep things in place, no? Then, if I use my force gloves to hover the light ball above my hand, while at the same time controlling the light, then it'll let me train both abilities at once. Is that right?" "Yes, that would work," Hino told him. "You're quite a bit away from that though. Splitting your focus is something you should only do when you know what you are doing with each individual action. You are months away from having that level of proficiency. Before you practice 2 different expressions of power, though, it's best to try it with one first." "What?" Naruto asked, rather bluntly, not understanding what she was saying. Hino sighed. "Rather than going for motion and light at the same time, try 2 motion effects instead, like this." With that, a small pebble rose up in front of Hino, before moving side to side, and then slowly drawing a circle in the air in front of her. "I used 2 motion effects to do that," she explained, one very vertical movement, and another for horizontal. "Once you've learned how to control motion in bursts, you'll learn to control it as a constant release, and only after that will you learn to remotely control something else. You have a very long way to go until you get to that point, Naruto." "If you say so." Naruto shrugged. It had taken him about 6 months to work out how to separate his spiritual and physical chakra, use it as a sort of force blast, and also use it to light up a ball. Given that this was all groundwork which he would later build on with more complex skills, it wasn't really that surprising that it would probably take him years to become at all accomplished in their use. "Hey, Hino, you told me that light, heat, and motion were the easiest to control. If they're the easiest, that means there's more complex stuff. What is it?" Naruto piped up. Hino narrowed her eyes. "I will tell you, Naruto, but only if you promise me that you won't mess around with them until I say you're good and ready for it." The other expressions of energy are very dangerous, and not to be trifled with. I promise, Naruto said, a serious expression on his face. Hino contemplated actually telling him or not, but after a moment sighed. The other expressions of energy yokai use are sound, corrosive, and raw power, and I don't ever want to hear of you messing around with them carelessly, especially not the last one. Okay, Naruto agreed, but how is sound dangerous? I get that corrosive energy destroys stuff, and I guess in its raw state energy is difficult to handle, but what's so bad about sound? Let me show you, Hino told him, before levitating 3 pebbles in the air in front of her. First, the most unpredictable, raw power. The first stone exploded with a bang, making Naruto jump. While it is useful, allowing someone to do amazing things, like summon yokai, create barriers, and do numerous other things, it has a tendency to explode if handled incorrectly. Secondly, corrosive. The second stone suddenly hissed, before it began to fragment, eaten away at like it had been dissolved in a powerful acid. Corrosive energy is difficult to create, as you have to condense your power quite a bit to use it, but once that's been done, there's very little that can stop it, and I've known yokai lose limbs and their lives when they've been careless with it. Thirdly, sound. The last stone, to Naruto's great surprise, shattered, and flew everywhere like shrapnel. Another way of putting it is that sound is pressure, and despite how simple it sounds to use, and it is fairly easy to produce, it is very difficult to direct, as it naturally wants to expand outwards from the point of origin. Okay, no messing around with what I don't understand, got it? Naruto said, his voice slightly higher pitched than normal, his wide eyes still locked on where the third pebble had been, before it had been subjected to Hino's attack. Good, Hino nodded. Now, keep an eye on your potion, we don't want your efforts to go to waste, do we? Naruto nearly snapped his own neck with the speed he turned towards the pot full of boiling bark, and seeing it ready for the next step, got to it. Hino settled down, watching her student, and relaxed after the strain using her power like that had caused her. She much preferred to stick to complex, if less energy-intensive, skills. Still, she'd teach Naruto everything she knew, and see what choices he made in the future. After Naruto's trip to the Valley of the End, things proceeded as they normally did. During the week, he woke up on the morning, got ready for school, went to class, came home to the forest, had his daily lesson with Hino, and then did whatever he wanted with the rest of the day. Usually, he'd end up playing some sort of game, but also, and sometimes instead of that, he'd do something else. For example, he borrowed a book of short stories from the library one time, and bribed Madara to take him to the Valley of the End so he could read some of them to Ran the Mizuchi. Another time, he'd gone wandering through the forest, identifying plants and collecting reagents for himself so he could make more potions. On the weekends, Naruto pretty much disappeared from Konoha. He'd spend his time in the forest, practicing placing traps to catch squirrels, birds, rabbits, and so on, and then he'd skin them and cook them over a campfire with some wild herbs he collected. During his time amongst yokai, Naruto had gained quite the taste for natural teas. Hino's next lesson, after he'd finished with the light ball, had in fact been to use his spiritual power to heat the water for his tea. The next step after that, as far as heat was concerned, was to heat the metal pots he made his potions in. Anyway, Naruto's time during the weekend was more varied than during the week. He'd sometimes ask around the local yokai if they needed something doing, and had taken to fulfilling these tasks as a way of experiencing what basic ninja missions were like. They were rarely difficult tasks. Once he'd had to gather the ingredients for a medicine Kogitsune used to change shape, and another time he'd helped sort it out when two friends had had an argument with each other. Simple as things might be, the yokai thanked him with a few small things, such as when one of the bird yokai he'd helped had gotten him a rare plant that didn't grow naturally in Fire Country. Very, very rarely, sometimes Akiko-sensei came to visit Naruto in the forest. She didn't do it more than once or twice a month, and even Naruto could tell she was rather uncomfortable there, but she was still a bit curious about yokai in spite of her hesitance. She met some of the yokai capable of taking a form visible and tangible to humans. Ryu, for example, could look like a regular human if he wished to, though he had to be careful not to let his wings show. Hino could also make herself seen by humans, though she didn't really bother with something so pointless. There were others capable of taking lesser forms, like Benio becoming a butterfly, or some of the lesser Inagami becoming dogs. and even the 3 weasels in the forest, and the single Bakaneko in the forest, who was still young and only capable of becoming a regular cat. Naruto was happy when Akiko took a liking to the teas, or more accurately, designs, that Naruto had made, and he put more of an effort in learning a Yukai version which was supposedly able to keep one youthful and rejuvenated, whatever that meant. All in all, Naruto was very happy with the way things were, and he wouldn't change a thing about the way he was living. Hiruzen Sarutobi was growing more and more concerned as time went by. Naruto, as much as he seemed happy, was drawing further and further away from other people, other humans, as time wore on. He wasn't even turning up at the orphanage to eat any longer, and outside of school hours, no one could find him at all, aside from the times he went to the library. As much as it pleased the Hokage to hear Naruto doing as well at school as he was, and that he was getting away from the glares and looks of disgust some people threw his way, the whispers too, Naruto needed to develop closer ties to the village, and he needed friends as well. The problem was that the Hokage, no matter how much power he had, couldn't force people to be friends, especially not young children. The best he could do was set up situations that would hopefully lead to the desired result. Of course, along comes the problem of Naruto just up and disappearing all the time. How could he set up situations for Naruto if the boy in question was never there? Sighing at the sight of his remaining paperwork, Hiruzen instead directed his attention to his crystal ball. Not really expecting to get a response, he's surprised when it locks onto Naruto and shows the blonde boy. Taking a quick look around the child, he sees that he's in the library. Deciding that his paperwork can wait, and checking that he has no appointments scheduled that afternoon, the Hokage leaves his office and makes quick time towards the library, which is thankfully quite close to the Hokage Tower. When he arrives, the librarian looks up curiously, before straightening up when she realizes that the Hokage himself has come to visit. He quietly inquires about the whereabouts of Naruto and is directed not, as he had expected, to the history section or what few texts are available to civilians regarding ninja. Instead, he's directed towards the craft section. His own curiosity roused, he heads down the aisles of shelves. It doesn't take him very long to find the blonde boy who is tucked away in an alcove, a small stack of books next to him. Taking a look at what books Naruto's reading, Hiruzen finds that they are about a variety of topics, such as preserving and tanning furs and hide, basic woodworking, and traps. Old man? Naruto looks up when a shadow falls over him to see the Hokage standing there. Hello, Naruto. Hiruzen smiles. An interesting selection of books you have there. Naruto nods his head. Well, if I'm going to be a ninja, I have to know how to look after myself when I'm out of the village, don't I? That means at least learning how to catch and cook wild animals, and what plants are good to eat, right? It's a very good idea, but a lot of people actually forget about things like that. Hiruzen chuckled. I was one of them back when I was a genin. I relied too much on the rations my team carried, and we ran out about 2 days before getting back to the village one time. Did you manage to catch or find anything you could eat? Naruto asked. You had the Nidaime Hokage for a sensei if I remember right. We did, but let me share a secret with you, Naruto. Hiruzen leaned forwards. Neither of my predecessors were very good hunters. In fact, Tobirama-sensei was abysmal. We only managed to catch a deer because he used a kunai cage bunshin jutsu to kill it. Shadow clones? Naruto murmured. I've read that some villages have solid clone techniques, but what good is a shadow clone? It's solid, like elemental clones, even if it is easily dispelled. Hiruzen told him. However, what's best about them is that they transfer their experience back to the ninja when they are dispersed. I'm not here to talk ninjutsu though, I came to see you. Okay? Naruto seemed confused as to why exactly he was here. Hiruzen sighed. Naruto, I worry about you. You might not be my own flesh and blood, but I think of you as a grandson just as I do Konohamaru, my daughter's son. For almost a year now, you constantly disappear goodness knows where. You don't stay at the orphanage, and the only time anyone knows where to find you is during school. Please, Naruto, can you tell me where you are staying? I'm staying in the forest, I like it there. Naruto told him. There's a small river and lake nearby, and I can fish and set traps and stuff. I also know what plants are good to eat, and which ones are healthy, so it's not like I'm starving or anything. I'm glad to hear you're doing well, Naruto, truly I am. But, you need to make some friends as well. Hiruzen sighed. It's not good for you to cut yourself off like you have. While you might be living, you're not developing as much as you otherwise might. Akiko-sensei is my friend, Naruto said. I'm glad for you, but she's not your age. The Hokage's eyes flickered to Benio settled on Naruto's head, and remembered his theory about butterfly summons. You need friends, Naruto, human friends. I've tried making friends with my classmates before. Naruto told him. It didn't work. Naruto, civilians tend to be wary about things they don't understand, ninjas too. But the latter generally have a much greater scale of unusual that they deal with, and tend to be more tolerant of oddities. Hiruzen chose his words carefully. Perhaps if you tried talking or playing with a clan child, or even one who has ninja parents, you might have an easier time making friends. If you say so, Naruto said, shrugging his shoulders. Why is it people don't like me anyway? The Hokage's eyes clouded over at Naruto's question, and answered it as best as he thought he could at this point in Naruto's life. When they look at you, they see something else, Naruto. It's not your fault, and I'm certain that in time you will prove yourself to this village, and they will see you how you were always supposed to be seen. He paused then. I'll make you a deal, Naruto. When you graduate the academy as a genin, I want you to introduce me to your best friend. If I see that you truly are close friends, then I will tell you why you are disliked, okay? Okay, Naruto replied hesitantly. I'll see what I can do then. You do that, Naruto, it will be good for you. The Hokage said, ruffling Naruto's hair. It seems this blonde mop of yours has gotten quite a bit longer and wilder when I wasn't looking, perhaps it's time to think about getting it cut. Naruto grinned. Nah, I like it this way. If you insist. Hiruzen huffed. Now, how about I treat you to lunch, and then maybe you can show me where your little camp is hidden, Sure, Naruto agreed. Where are you going to take me? Recalling Naruto's mother's fondness for a particular type of food, Hiruzen made a decision on where he would take Naruto. A ramen stand? Naruto asked, looking at where Hiruzen had taken him. Correct, I have a feeling you'll like what they sell here, Naruto. Hiruzen smiled in nostalgia, recalling how Kushina would devour half a dozen bowls of salt ramen at a time here, despite being quite a good cook herself, or at least Minato appeared to be addicted to her cooking. If you say so, Naruto shrugged. I guess I'll have a miso ramen, maybe? So will I then, Hiruzen said. Did you catch that, Tuchi? Of course, Hokage-sama. A smiling man, obviously this Tuchi person, said. And I see you've brought a friend with you too. I have. This is Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto, this is Tuchi Ichiraku, owner of Ramen Ichiraku, and quite the skilled chef as well. The Hokage introduced them both. Nice to meet you, Naruto, it's always good to see a new face. Tuchi smiled at the young blonde. It's nice to meet you as well. Naruto politely greeted the man. Okay then, your ramen will be ready shortly, Tuchi said, turning away to get to work. While they did that, Hiruzen decided to have a chat with Naruto. It had been far too long since he'd done just that, and the small blonde was one of his favorite people. So, Naruto, I saw the books you borrowed from the library, and you mentioned something about traps. I'm going to take a guess and say that you want to do something with the skins of the animals you eat, right? The Hokage said. Yeah, that's right. Naruto nodded. The book says you can use an animal's brain to tan their hide, so I don't have to buy any special chemicals or anything. I have some rabbit and squirrel skins waiting for me back at my camp so I can try it out. And the woodworking books? Hiruzen asked curiously. Everyone needs a hobby. Naruto shrugged. Besides, when I get older, I want to see what fuinjutsu can do, so practicing carving and calligraphy should be a good idea, no? Fuinjutsu? Hiruzen blinked in surprise. A rather underused skill that most focus on ninjutsu and taijutsu, with others preferring genjutsu or medical techniques. Fuinjutsu, a very uncommon discipline, and one with a lot of potential too. It's unfortunate, but there's very few ninjas in the entirety of the elemental nations who are accomplished at seals, and the number of seal masters can be counted on two hands. Are seals really that difficult to make? Naruto asked with a frown. The Yukai-style seals he'd seen were simple and logical. If he had seen a circuit diagram, he'd actually compare them to each other in how they did what they were supposed to, with no different ways of interpreting them. Copying seals is actually rather easy, it's how explosive tags and storage scrolls are mass-produced. The Hokage told him. Creating a brand new seal from scratch, that's a completely different thing, and incredibly difficult. It's also very time-consuming and very dangerous too. If you ever do decide to make your own seals, I'd advise you to have a solid clone of some sort. Take it somewhere isolated when you first test it out. I'll have to be at least a genin to get access to even basic stuff about sealing. Naruto replied, I don't think you'll have to worry about me blowing myself up for a few years yet. Hiruzen chuckled. No, I guess not. The two of them kept talking as they waited for their ramen to be ready. Hiruzen felt himself relax quite a bit. Despite not having much human interaction, Naruto was more well-balanced than he could have hoped for him to be. Now all that was left was to see where he had hidden himself away, and he'd take a step back. Telling him that he'd share why the villagers didn't like him if he made a friend might be rather manipulative, but it would be good for Naruto, and it would be good for his peace of mind. After all, was not the Will of Fire all about cherishing strong bonds with others and protecting them? Their food arrived in good time, and the both of them dug into it. Neither spoke much as they ate their food, but once they'd both finished, Hiruzen turned to Naruto, asking him how much he'd liked it, anticipating quite an enthusiastic response. Instead, he got something less grandiose. It was good, really good, but I think I prefer roast squirrel myself. Naruto responded. Not quite the answer I was expecting. Hiruzen muttered, earning him a confused look from Naruto. Never mind though, shall we go and see your little camp now? Sure, Naruto said, before getting up and leading the way. Genma Shiranui, one of the Hokage's guards, couldn't help but feel a shiver run down his spine as he followed the Sandaime Hokage and Naruto Uzumaki deeper and deeper into the forest. He felt like there were dozens of eyes on him constantly, but there was no one around whenever he stopped to look. It was freaking him the heck out. He also couldn't help but think on all of the monster stories he'd heard that young Naruto had come up with, and a small part of his mind that he didn't want to acknowledge wondered, was he right? It certainly felt like they were surrounded, but he couldn't see anyone, and it was extremely creepy. He'd be happy when this was over and the Sandaime was back in his office. His unease only grew when Naruto looked back over his shoulder at him with an amused expression on his face. That did it, Naruto Uzumaki was officially a creepy kid. Regardless of who his parents were, and Genma knew exactly who they were. He was definitely someone that made him feel like looking over his shoulder every 2 seconds despite knowing he wouldn't see anything. The other guards that had followed the Hokage weren't exempt from the sensations that Genma was feeling, and they all felt at least some hesitance about coming back to this part of the forest in the future, with 2 of them even making mental notes to avoid it if at all possible. When they got to where Naruto's camp was, they were surprised at how good it looked. They'd been expecting something that could be called ramshackle, at best, but instead, they found something that at least looked presentable. There was where Naruto obviously slept, a shelter made from lashed-together branches, with another smaller shelter with doors and shelves that held clothes, wooden bowls and plates, soap, and other things like that. Nearby, tied to parallel sticks, were the skins that Naruto was working on. Beside Naruto's sleeping area were a few notebooks that the blonde boy quickly tidied away. The only other particularly notable thing there was a circle of stones and scorched earth where Naruto probably had his campfire. You seem to have done well for yourself, Naruto. Hiruzen said, honestly surprised. He wasn't expecting something as good as this, but then again, Naruto had started disappearing almost a year ago, and if he'd been building up this little hideaway of his that long, well, he'd obviously put the effort in to make it as well as he could. Yeah, but I might rebuild some of it if I can learn something good from those woodworking books, and if I can get my hands on the right tools. Naruto said proudly. Hiruzen mused to himself. That was something he could do for Naruto discreetly. After all, a basic set of tools was innocuous enough. He paused then as he caught sight of something that was a little more refined than the wooden plates and bowls Naruto had, aside from the metal pots that was. Naruto, are those poison vials I can see there? He asked. Ah, Akiko-sensei gave me them for my last birthday. The 6-year-old said. I've been reading about plants that are good for your health and how to mix them together to get useful antidotes and things, like those chakra pills you can buy. My mixtures are nowhere near that good, but it's good practice anyway. Well, you're certainly learning plenty of useful little skills. Hiruzen praised him. It seems portions of the Ninja Academy curriculum will be useless to you by the time you get there. Oh? Naruto tilted his head to the side questioningly. What do you actually need to pass the Ninja Academy? Oh, you have to pass several exams. Hiruzen said. Let's see, there's a history test, a taijutsu test, throwing accuracy and speed with kunai and shuriken, and the Academy 3 ninjutsu. He paused. You can get a bonus score for showing another ninjutsu you know, aptitude for genjutsu, or skill with a weapon. Naruto nodded, absorbing all of what he was told. Old man, what are the Academy 3? They're 3 simple techniques that are quite useful. The Hokage explained. Henge creates a shell of chakra around you and reflects and refracts light to make you appear as someone or something else. Kawarimi allows you to swap places with another object, though you practice with a log roughly your own weight. The last of the 3 is Bunshin, which creates illusionary clones that can confuse and misdirect an enemy. Wow, they sound awesome. Naruto exclaimed. That's because they are, but aside from Kawarimi, most people tend to forget them for other, more destructive jutsu. The Hokage added. Most people dismiss them because they are the basics. That sounds silly. Naruto commented. Hiruzen chuckled. But there are people who go to the other extreme and become really good ninja just with basic techniques. Shisui of the body flicker is a really good ninja, and his signature jutsu is the shunshin, something that almost every chunin ninja knows, and even a handful of genin too. So it's really easy to become a super awesome ninja? Naruto asked. Easy? No, it isn't. Hiruzen gently admonished the boy. However, if you find out what you're good at early and train hard, you can become really good without knowing dozens of high-level techniques. Of course, strong ninjutsu doesn't hurt, and if you ever want to get to my level, you need to be strong in all areas, but someone who knows what they want, and has the resources, can go a lot further than someone who fumbles about trying everything out and never settling down. Naruto didn't reply, a contemplative look on his face. Now, Naruto, I've got to get back to my office. Paperwork waits for no man after all. Hiruzen said. It was good seeing you today, and I'm happy to see how well you can look after yourself. Just remember to try and make a few friends, please. Bye, old man, see you another time. Naruto waved the Hokage and his guards off, still thinking about what his grandfather figure had said. I'll be seeing you then. Goodbye. The Hokage bid him farewell too, and left, followed by his personal guards. Unseen by the Hokage and his guards, there were several yokai present that watched them disappear. Once they'd left hearing range, Hino took her pipe out of her mouth and gave Naruto a look. Well, that was informative. Now we at least know what you need to graduate Ninja Academy. She commented. Some of it we should be able to cross off the list quite easily. Yeah, I've been reading plenty of history books. Naruto agreed. That too, but I was actually referring to 2 of the ninjutsu. We yokai are capable of both physical transformations and illusions, and I'll start you on both once I feel your primary 3 are up to scratch. Hino corrected him. We have no equivalent for this Kawarimi though, so you'll have to wait for the academy to teach that to you. So, to pass, that leaves me with taijutsu and weapon throwing skills. Naruto mused. As well as any of the extra credit proficiencies you wish to look into. Ryu added. I would have thought you would overdo something rather than not do enough. Yeah, but I'm already covered with the yokai techniques I know that would count as an additional ninjutsu, and I could learn another illusion while I'm faking the bunshin. That only really leaves learning to use a weapon from the extra credit choices. I also have to learn to fight in hand-to-hand and throw standard weaponry. Naruto said. Is there any yokai that are any good at fighting like a human? No, none that I know of. Ryu shook his head. And martial arts isn't something that can be learned at all quickly either. That is something that will take years to learn properly, so it is best to start early if you can. Is there no books in the library on, what do humans call them, cats? Naruto laughed at that. I think you mean katas, and no, there isn't. What's in the library is stuff any civilian has access to, and that means there's nothing at all in there about fighting. I need to learn how to fight though. Clan children start learning really young, so they'll have a head start on me there. Benio snorted. True, but I doubt many of them have the same drive you do. So things will probably be more equal than you expect, at least when things balance out. I don't think they teach their kids the same level of wilderness survival stuff that you know, and your traps are pretty good already. Are there any yokai that can fight with anything resembling a style? Naruto huffed. Not that I know of. Ryu smiled lightly. You forget that almost all of the yokai around here are beast types. The only sort of yokai that might know how to fight like a human are weapon Tsukumagami, and they're more common in Iron Country. They are? Naruto asked. Could we go to Iron Country, and do you think they'd be willing to teach me? Hino calmed Naruto down. You won't be going right now. Iron Country is quite far away, and it is very cold there too. Before you go there at all, you will be prepared for the weather, and you will not be skipping any school because of it either. So it's cold? Does that mean I can use a heat technique to keep myself warm? Naruto asked with a smile. I could also make something out of the furs I'm going to be tanning too. Hino huffed. You'll need far better control if you're going to keep yourself warm with your spiritual power. One slip up and you could cook yourself alive. Wearing furs, taking some firewood with you and lighting that, or simply warming up your clothing are all better ideas. Then I'll do that then. Naruto nodded. Ryu chuckled, shaking his head at the sight before him, before contributing what he could. As for them teaching you, weapon Tsukumagami tend to fall into one of two categories, the bloodthirsty and the protective. The former will want nothing more than to kill you in as gory a fashion as they can, while the latter may teach you something, especially as you're still a child. So, could I go to Iron Country during school break in 2 months? Naruto asked. Not without taking someone, or preferably more than one, to take care of you. Iron Country is a dangerous place, and you are not strong enough to deal with even moderate threats from yokai. Hino sternly cautioned him. Looking towards Ryu, Naruto was disappointed to see him shake his head. This is my territory, Naruto, I can't just leave it, especially not to enter another's domain. Ryu shook his head. Why not Madara? He's never got much to do, and he is rather powerful. Masuzu too, but I don't think you've met him yet, and he's likely to test you in some fashion. Hino nodded to herself. Yes, Masuzu is the only other particularly strong yokai around here aside from myself, Ryu, Madara, and Raka. Raka and Ryu have their territories to watch over, and I am strong in a different way to the horse and the dog. Enough of this for now. Benio interrupted them. Brat, why don't you go play with the Kappa, or the Kogitsune? I hear that they were planning something this afternoon, it could be interesting, no? Okay, I suppose. Naruto answered. See you guys later. As soon as Naruto disappeared, Benio looked at the others with a serious expression on her face. Earlier today, the Hokage made a promise to Naruto. He basically told Naruto to make at least one good human friend, and if he did so then he'd explain why so many people in the village fear and hate him as much as they do. Did he say anything about what it might be? Ryu asked. Not much, just that when they see Naruto, they don't see the boy himself but something else, and that ninja had a different scale of weird to most other people. She told them, he's encouraging Naruto to become a ninja, and he seems quite invested with him as well, but I don't know why. Can you guess what he's on about? Ryu sighed. I can't work it out either. It sounds like Naruto is a Jinchuriki, a host to one of those tailed beasts, but he doesn't feel like one himself. The feeling I get from him is different, even if it is similar in some ways to what I've sensed from those beings in the past. Hino grunted in agreement. He feels incomplete, like someone attempted to make him a vessel, but didn't do it properly, or like they attempted to seal something that wasn't actually a tailed beast using the wrong method. Neither answer makes much sense. Ryu nodded. The 9 tails appeared 6 years ago, right when Naruto was born, so if he was a Jinchuriki, that's the only one he could really have sealed inside of him. That would at least explain his ridiculously massive reserves, but like we have said, he doesn't feel like a host. Well, could some of the 9 tails loose energy have been sealed inside of Naruto then? Benio asked. It wasted so much of its power that everything the area it appeared was absolutely saturated with its power, and if I remember right, the Biju actually produced power naturally, so could its chakra be doing the same inside of Naruto? That would explain it, Hino mused. Without the entire tailed beast, his own power would feel a little similar without being identical, and that connection might just be enough for villagers to despise him, especially if they jump to incorrect conclusions. However, it changes nothing even if it is true. Ryu shook his head. The 9 Biju are not yokai, and so our own methods of using our power will not necessarily work for its dense chakra, and could be dangerous for Naruto. Our best option is to gather more information, and if one of the requirements for getting that information is Naruto graduating from the Ninja Academy, well, all we can do is make him the best ninja we can, no? Not like we were going to do otherwise. Hino shrugged, a small smirk on her face. Benio rolled her eyes. Right, whatever, I'm going to go catch up to Naruto. See you both. She waved to them as she disappeared in the same direction Naruto had gone. Hino groaned and put a hand to her head. Right, looks like I'm going to have to go over the notes I have for Naruto's lessons and modify them again. Ryu laughed lightly. Don't try and act like you don't enjoy teaching him. I never said I didn't like doing so. Hino huffed. I've never taught anyone like this before, and I do enjoy it, but that doesn't stop it being a lot of work for me. Ryu smiled as he shook his head. I'll leave you to it then. Yeah, see ya. Hino waved him off, already working out a new schedule to get Naruto as up to scratch as she could for his trip to Iron Country in just 2 months. Hiruzen tried to keep a closer eye on Naruto after his talk with the boy, with the key word here being tried. His crystal ball still refused to show him where the blonde was, and even though he remembered exactly where Naruto had led them, neither he nor his guards could ever get back to where the boys' camp was. He still attended school though, and went to the library rather frequently. The Hokage kept a rather close eye on what sort of books Naruto was reading, and found that they were mostly craft books and fiction. There were occasionally times Naruto would take out something else, like one on myths, legends, and religions of the elemental nations, and another on the geography of the continent and the different countries. Even to Hiruzen's eyes, it only looked like a young boy who was already capable of looking after himself and looking at things he might be able to turn his hand to and how to do so. He'd seen no effort from the boy to make any new friends though, or if he tried to do so, it was when the Hokage wasn't watching him. He'd wait and hope that Naruto made a friend. Perhaps it would happen when he joined the Ninja Academy, or perhaps before. Maybe, as he was wandering around the village, Naruto might bump into a Nara, an Aburame, or even a Hyuga, and their personalities might mesh and form an unbreakable friendship. Not that such a thing was likely, situations like that were reserved for fiction. That didn't mean he would lose hope though. Hiruzen was, if nothing else, optimistic. In the meantime though, he had a village to run, and that was a lot of work. Most of the Hokage's day was spent approving or rejecting various ideas that were put forward by various groups that handled different parts of the village. While it wasn't quite a council, it was sometimes referred to as such. There was a representative of the merchants syndicate, who ensured that all goods sold in Konoha were of good quality and reasonably priced. There was a representative of Konoha's various educational institutions. Also there was a spokesperson for the military police, and one for the agricultural association, as well as a handful of others. It was they who received the initial applications, reports, complaints, and so on. They handled what they could, and what they couldn't was passed on to the Hokage. Still, even with them reducing the amount of paperwork that arrived on his desk every day, it was still a sizable amount, and kept him busy for hours on end. He often lamented that he didn't have as much free time as he did as a Junin. He saw little enough of his family as it was, and that was without his current arguments he was having with his son Asuma. He tried to retire once already, and his successor had died shortly afterwards, leaving him to become Hokage again. The problem here was, there wasn't anyone really suited to becoming the Godem Hokage that Hiruzen knew of. As much as Tsunade's grandfather and granduncle had both been Hokages, she herself wasn't suited to it. She was easily angered, and let her emotions rule her. Jiraiya was even less suited to it, the man being very disorganized, and aside from his lecherous reputation, he had trouble handling his responsibilities as well. Kakashi, Guy, Ibiki, there was so many with plenty of potential, but they just weren't right for the position. Hiruzen privately despaired of ever passing the hat on before he died. The first, second, and fourth Hokages had all died defending their village, and while he would gladly give his own life for his village, the Sandaime would prefer a much more peaceful end himself. Nevertheless, he'd hold onto his hat until he either died or found someone who could replace him. Unseen by the Hokage, Naruto was actually learning something new from Hino. She had declared his use of heat to be passable, and his motion and light manipulation to be good enough for now. As she was leery of teaching him anything about sound, corrosive, or raw power effects, she instead started teaching him more about potions and yokai seals. With potions, they had simply gone over which ones Naruto already knew, what ingredients could be substituted for others if they were unavailable, how that would affect the potion, and so on and so forth. That's not to say he didn't learn some new mixtures, because he did, but they focused on refining what he already knew before going ahead and learning something new. It was actually the Yukai seals that Naruto was rather interested in, more than anything else, because if you made a seal right, all you had to do was provide power to it, and it would do exactly what it was supposed to do, with no more input from the user. Hino had taught him the basic motion, light, and heat formulas, as well as a number of individual symbols and the grammar of Yukai seals. With this knowledge, he was able to expand his repertoire of seals himself, or even create them on the fly. Hino did tell him not to use any of them before she'd looked them over though, she didn't want him blowing himself up or anything. They were learning a seal right then actually, a new one Naruto had never used before today. The seal itself was composed of symbols for creation, domination, and spirit. He was, in fact, learning how to create a type of Shikigami, with these ones being artificially created spirits that would obey his instructions. Well, that was the theory at least. Naruto didn't think Benio would ever let him forget that the first time he tried to create a small group of Shiki, he'd immediately lost control of 3 of them, which had proceeded to pick a fight with, and somehow lose to, a rather aggressive squirrel. He could still hear her laughter echoing in his head. Nevertheless, Naruto was quite proud of his Shiki, even if they weren't particularly strong yet. Creating them was the first actually combat-capable technique Hino had taught him. Okay, so they were clumsy, weak, and stupid, but they would get better as Naruto got better at making them. The Shikigami took the form of large, black, blob-like people that looked really stretched out. They had white masks on where their faces should be, with 2 eye holes despite the Shiki not actually possessing eyes themselves. Thankfully, the Shiki actually had relatively human hands, and so could grip and hold things just fine. This was especially useful as Hino had instructed Naruto to command his Shiki to pick up thick and heavy branches to use as improvised clubs. What resulted was quite an intimidating sight, a dozen faceless, black creatures that stood around 7 feet tall and held heavy improvised weapons. Most of them held their branches like clubs, but 2 of them had found relatively straight branches and held them like a staff. Now, Naruto, tell me anything you can notice about your Shiki. Hino said to Naruto. Well, they're actually doing what I told them to this time. He said, they're all standing differently as well, I thought they'd all act exactly like each other instead of this. They're not moving either, just turning their heads whenever I move so they're always looking right at me. Hino smiled. Good observations. Shikigami, at least correctly made ones, will do absolutely nothing unless you tell them to. The only exception is if you're attacked, in which case they'll attack your opponent and defend you. The differences you're noticing are caused by small, random factors, and don't really make a difference. However, what you didn't mention is that some of them are having more difficulty than others just holding their clubs. That will clear up as you get better at making Shikigami, but there are 2 quick and dirty ways of improving them. She paused here, thinking of something, before deciding to ask Naruto if he could guess what those 2 things were. Well, there's 3 things that are used to make Shiki: the paper I drew the symbols on, the ink I used, and the spiritual power I put into it. Naruto thought about it for a moment. 2 ways of improving them would be increasing the amount and density of Riryoku I use, right? That's one way, yes. Hino admitted. However, I was thinking of the material aspect of this technique. Using more Riryoku will make your Shiki stronger, but it will also shorten their lifespan, unless you use something stronger than paper as a base. The ink is the other thing I was thinking of, or actually replacing it with your blood. While it won't make your Shiki too much stronger like using more power does, it reinforces your binding on them, so you're less likely to lose control of them. If they work, why did you say they were quick and dirty? Naruto asked. Hino huffed. A properly skilled Yukai can make much better Shiki with the proper technique than an amateur who simply overloads the formula. And while using blood does make it easier to control them, few Yukai are willing to bleed themselves whenever they want to make a new Shiki. Are Shiki really all that common? I mean, as far as I know, you're the only one in the forest that uses them, or really anything that resembles a structured technique. Naruto couldn't help but wonder. There honestly aren't many that do things like I do. Hino confided in him. The weaker Yukai simply don't have enough power to make use of such things, and you'll find that most stronger Yukai rely on their own natural strength, speed, or inherent abilities, as you'll likely see when you go to Iron Country. I will? Naruto asked. Well, there's some local yokai that have natural techniques, like Madara and his purifying light, but when you go to Iron Country, you're likely to run into at least one Yuki Onna while there. They have a natural aptitude for snow and ice manipulation and rely heavily on that. Hino told him. They are very dangerous, so be careful if you do see one. I will. Naruto nodded. It's starting to sound like Iron Country is especially dangerous with how many warnings everyone is giving me. That's because it is, Hino said. The climate is quite harsh, and the yokai that make their home there tend to be quite a bit more aggressive than anywhere else in the elemental nations, though I don't know why. There's only a few places that are worse than there, and don't even ask me where those places are. I'm not particularly happy about you going to Iron Country as it is, but so long as you are well prepared, I will allow it. Is that why you taught me how to make shiki, so they could defend me? Naruto asked, taking another look at his creations. It is, Hino said. Before you go, I'm going to make sure you have plenty of pre-prepared shikigami on you. I'm also going to teach you how to combine light and heat to make a basic fire dart, and Ryu will teach you how to infuse your Riryoku into your fists and feet to fight. Fire dart? Naruto perked up in interest. Hino raised a hand into the air, and a small flash of fire formed itself into a needle-like shape about the length of her middle finger, which was promptly fired into the air. It's pretty weak, and won't do much more than sting most yokai, but it's something to base future things on. Hino told him. It's most effective either against low-class yokai, or cast as a cluster. Demonstrating the latter, she raised her hand again and cast the technique. This time, instead of a single dart, she launched roughly 24 of them in a tight cone. That was awesome, Naruto exclaimed, his eyes wide and a grin on his face. Yes, but it's still rather weak. Hino cautioned him. It should do more damage to a human though, they're not spirits like we are, so I don't want you practicing it on anyone. Even then, I don't want you seeking out a fight with this thing. It won't do you much good unless you're using it as a distraction or targeting a weak spot like the eyes or something. I'm not going to Iron Country to look for a fight. Naruto sighed. I know you're not. Hino ruffled his hair. However, you're still going somewhere dangerous, and I'll be damned if I'm not going to do my best to make sure you come back in one piece. Okay. Naruto grumbled to himself for a moment, before turning back to his shikigami. Now, to practice telling my minions what to do. Minions? Hino raised an eyebrow. Why are you calling them that? It's what Madara said underlings are called. Naruto replied. Is he wrong? Not exactly. Hino laughed. Minions just isn't a very polite thing to call them. That's fine for shiki, but if you ever have followers of your own, it's probably best not to call them that. Okay, I'll remember that. Naruto nodded his head, committing Hino's lesson to memory. You do that. She smiled. Now run along and practice. Naruto. 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 A group of excited kappa calling his name came tumbling into the clearing carrying bags of something over their shoulders. We heard you had shikigami collecting tree branches for weapons, and we have something to make them better. Oh, and what would that be? Hino asked, raising an eyebrow at the group. One of the kappa took the sack of their shoulder and tipped some of the contents out. What was in the bag, it turned out, was a load of bent and broken kunai and shuriken. We've been collecting the stuff that's been abandoned in the human training grounds. One of the kappa told her. There's not much good stuff, but we were putting together a pack of it that Naruto could practice with. We didn't know what to do with all of the broken stuff though, but now we have an idea. Another kappa nodded their head rapidly. Yeah, we thought that the clubs the shikigami have would be better if we took some vines or string and wrapped all of the broken ninja stars around them. One of the good ninja knives could even make one of the sticks into a spear. Hino smiled at the group of kappa. That is a good idea, I suppose. I had been meaning to whittle down the branches Naruto's shiki had found, and then etch some seals into them to make them more effective, but adding sharp metal would make them more dangerous. She then caught sight of Naruto's face, and saw how pale he looked at the sight of the metal. However, as dangerous as it would also be very messy. Instead of adding them to the clubs, why don't you help me carve and prepare them for the seals I will add instead, while Naruto practices making more shiki? If you say so. One of the kappa shrugged. But what are we going to do with all of this scrap metal? Oh, I have an idea or two. Hino said. Let's just set that aside for now though. Once Naruto was away from Hino and the kappa, he managed to breathe easier again. Having seen the broken shuriken and kunai, and imagining them wrapped around a club, he hadn't been able to get out of his head what sort of damage they'd have done. He didn't know what it was, but the blunt force damage of a club, or the sharp cutting or piercing damage of sword didn't bother him anywhere near as much as imagining how a spiked or bladed club would mangle someone. Maybe it was just thinking about how flesh would be torn apart rather than cut, or bones broken in the case of blunt weapons, but he didn't think he'd have been able to look at the clubs if Hino had gone along with the Kappa's idea. He made an effort to drive that from his mind though. She had said no, and right now he was supposed to be doing something else. Namely, he was to continue practicing how to make shikigami, as his were currently pathetic. Some of them had had trouble lifting a heavy branch, something the average dog could do. Well, Hino had said putting more Riryoku into it would make them stronger, but they wouldn't last long if he did so. She also said it was easier to control them if he wrote the formula in his own blood. So, if he put those both together, he would get a stronger shiki that was fairly easy to control. Picking up a piece of paper, which had been torn down into a piece roughly the size of his palm, Naruto used a clean knife to cut his left hand. He then dipped a calligraphy brush into his own blood and used his neatest hand writing to draw the 3 required symbols on the paper, before adding the binding symbol that joined them together. He channeled his spiritual power into it once he was done, and tossed it away as some indescribable black substance erupted from the paper, and began to form another shikigami, this one being closer to 8.5 feet tall compared to the 7 feet his others were. The differences between this one and the others, aside from the extra height, were immediately obvious. Its movements were smoother, and it sketched a bow to Naruto, almost appearing to have some form of respect for its creator. There seemed to be some sort of intelligence about it that the others lacked as well. So, Naruto decided to test them out. He looked between his old and new shikigami and gave them their instructions. Okay, a test. I've got an idea for one. Without leaving this clearing, you guys are going to fight. All 12 of the old against the one new guy. I'll be watching to see how you do, okay? Don't start until I say go. With that, Naruto backed out of the clearing and climbed a solid-looking tree. Now having a good vantage point to watch the coming fight from, Naruto counted down the start of the fight. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, start. Immediately as he said the last word, the initial dozen shikigami lumbered towards the newer one. However, its response wasn't to attack in turn. Instead, it dived towards the edge of the clearing behind it and to the left. When it stood up, it held in its hands a rather unwieldy stick of wood almost as long as it was tall and maybe 6 or 7 inches thick. Even the strengthened shiki was having some trouble swinging it. Apparently, overcharging it with Riryoku hadn't made it super strong like he'd hoped. Though maybe if he got better at making them, they'd be stronger then. But it was still about as strong as a somewhat muscled civilian. Holding its improvised weapon with 2 hands, the newer shiki swung its weapon at the approaching older shikigami. It actually managed to get a rather solid connection on one of them, knocking it to the ground, but not destroying it. That happened when it lifted the branch up and slammed it down on the downed shiki. As the other 11 older shiki stumbled towards their newer counterpart, Naruto watched as the dead shiki seemed to dissolve, revealing the piece of paper it had been created from, which then rapidly dissolved as well. Damn, it seemed he couldn't reuse the talismans from dead shiki. On the other hand though, it didn't matter if he lost them in fights, because enemy ninja couldn't copy what he'd done from the remains if there were none. Naruto looked back at the fight to see that another 2 of the older shiki had been taken care of by the newer one. However, 4 of the older shikigami had gotten a grip on the branch the newer one had been using as a weapon, and it seemed those 4 were amongst the strongest of Naruto's original group, as they were successfully preventing their opponent from swinging its improvised club. The remaining 5 older shiki were now in range of the newer one and began to tear apart whatever black substance they were made of. It was rather nauseating to see chunks of black flesh, which looked like jelly now, being tossed about after being torn off something that was vaguely human-shaped. The newer shikigami was faltering now, being overwhelmed by numbers rather than skill or strength. It still managed to take down another 4 of its attackers before being killed, though. That left Naruto with 5 of the older shiki remaining, less than half the number at the start of the fight. Naruto sighed. Okay, so empowered shiki are definitely worth it, but they're no match for the average academy student unless I outnumbered them maybe 10 to 1 or better. He mumbled to himself. How then, aside from practicing to make better shiki, do I improve them? Benio fluttered off his hair and sat on the branch beside him, shifting into her more human form. The answer to that is obvious. She smirked. If you're going to outnumber them anyway, make those numbers count for something, no? That newer shiki you made certainly knew how to think its way around a problem. Huh? Naruto confusedly tilted his head to the side. Benio rolled her eyes. What was the first thing it did at the start of the fight? It found a weapon, one with a range advantage. Imagine a small group of shiki, say 12, with spears. Now have them stand in a formation, maybe 6 wide and 2 deep, or 4 wide and 3 deep. That sounds much more effective already, doesn't it? It does. Naruto agreed. So you think I should look up infantry tactics then? It couldn't hurt. Benio shrugged. It might be better for you to experiment though. I mean, ninja don't really fight together, do they? They use their own skills to win a fight, rather than work as part of an army. I guess so, Naruto admitted. I've heard of ninja using combination techniques, mostly wind and fire, to make a bigger fire. But the only weapon ninjas use is the sword. And most ninja don't even use that, relying on throwing weapons or hand-to-hand, aside from jutsu that is. Look at samurai for inspiration then. Benio shrugged. Heck, use bandits as an example. They have to work together if they ever fight, and I'm sure there'll have been at least one group of bandits that had some sort of success fighting ninjas. Naruto contemplated that idea for a moment, before looking back at his shikigami. I wonder if Hino knows any seals that would make shields harder to break. So, did I have a good idea or what, brat? Benio smirked at Naruto. You did. Naruto nodded. Now I've got to think about how to make it work, and then get good enough with my shiki so they can actually fight properly with their weapons. A spear and shield is useless if my shiki are too clumsy to use them. Then get to work practicing then. Benio nudged him. You do realize that the shiki are made using your spiritual power, right? That's how they know who their master is, and it's common sense that if you are good at something, your shikigami should know what they're doing. Okay, I'll get to practicing then. Naruto nodded his head, before slipping off the branch and started creating more shikigami, doing his best to make them as strong as he possibly could. He took extra care to draw the symbols as accurately as he could, and he also tried focusing on how he used his Riryoku to bring them to life, to see if he could improve them that way. While he did this, Benio wandered off to tell Hino to make at least one short spear and shield for Naruto to practice with, and later more to arm his shiki with. They were sticking with clubs and staffs for now. They were simpler even than spears, but Hino did say she would look into it. 2 weeks before the break, when Naruto intended to go to Iron Country, Naruto asked Hino where he could find Misuzu. If he wanted to get the Yukai on his side, he had to set aside some time to do whatever test Misuzu would want him to do, and as he didn't know how long that would take, it was best to get it done before he was to head off to Iron Country. It turned out that Misuzu wasn't too much deeper into the forest than Naruto usually ventured, and it didn't take him long to get there. He did notice a few Yukai, one of which took the form of a frog, moving ahead of him, so it came as no surprise when he saw Misuzu that the Yukai was expecting him. What was surprising was just how massive Misuzu was. He was gigantic, much bigger than Madara. He was humanoid, with a human left hand and a hoof for a right hand. His face and ears were equine in shape, and he had a small, at least relatively small, pair of horns on his head, peeking out from under his long gray hair. It is about time you came to see me, human. I have been expecting you for some time now. Misuzu said. I didn't know that. I'd have come sooner if I'd known you were waiting. Naruto apologized. It is not a problem. Misuzu replied. You had no knowledge of me until recently, and even then did not know I wished to meet you. You are here now, and that is what matters. Now speak, why have you come to me? I intend to go to Iron Country soon, but I have been told that it is a dangerous place. Naruto told the Yukai. I have trained myself as much as I am able, but I remain weak. I had hoped to prove myself to you, and if I managed to do so, then I would ask that you watch over me during my time in Iron Country. You wish to prove yourself before asking a boon of me? Misuzu said. Commendable of you, to think of doing that before making demands of someone stronger than you are. As it so happens, there is something you can do to prove your worth to me, and if you should accomplish this task and survive, I will follow you to the north, and the land of iron. What task is it that you wish me to do? The nervous 6-year-old asked, being as polite as he could. There is a rogue group of yokai in the area. Masuzu told him. They wander the continent and devour any weak yokai they come across, most likely in an effort to become stronger. They attacked close by yesterday afternoon, and I was in the process of putting together a small team to take care of them. My test is this. Discover their whereabouts and eliminate them using only your own skills and abilities. Do this, and I will accept you as one of us. Is there any information you can give me to start with? Naruto asked. Do you know how many of them there are? How strong they are? How am I even supposed to identify them? Masuzu smiled, though even that was a scary sight with how large his mouth was. One of the yokai here can show you where the attack happened, so you may search outwards from there. The yokai are weak, low class, and have only managed to kill others by ambushing them with greater numbers. We estimate that there are between 10 and 20 yokai in the group. The leader of the group is supposed to drag around a large wooden hammer. Thank you, I'll get right on that then. Naruto swallowed nervously. This would be his first fight where there would be a definite degree of risk involved. He'd started sparring against his Shikigami ever since he'd learned to make them, but neither he nor they were particularly skilled, and they were always stronger and faster than he was, what with him being 6 years old. Still, he was as prepared as he could hope to be right now. He had a club that Hino had carved for him that would be an effective weapon against weaker yokai, and he had a small round shield as well. He had some pre-made Shikigami in his pockets, wrapped up in packs of a dozen, ready to use. Each Shikigami also had a club or staff each to fight with. This was going to be nerve-wracking, but it was also going to be doable. He was facing, at most, 20 rogue low-level yokai, and he could spare a few packs of Shikigami to fight them alongside himself. And while his Shiki weren't particularly strong, they were better than when he'd first started making them. If you are ready, Eiko can show you where the last attack happened. Masuzu said, indicating a relatively human-looking yokai who had pale green hair and sharp yellow eyes. Benio, you stay here. Naruto addressed the butterfly on his head. I can do this, trust me. I'll see you later, okay? Benio transformed into her human form again and gave Naruto a concerned look. Be careful, brat, otherwise Hino will kill me when I tell her what I'm letting you do. What will it take for you to stop calling me brat all the time? Naruto huffed. Benio gave him an odd smirk. Come back in peace and with an awesome story to tell and I'll think about it. See you later then, Benio. Naruto smiled at her before turning around and leaving the clearing, following after Eiko. He didn't see Benio's expression twist in concern once he looked away from her. That's all for now. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments.